something for a second.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program will begin shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
Hi everyone, how's everyone doing? Well, good for you, because yesterday I got my bottom braces, so my mouth is very sore. Oh, my name is Catherine Sakida, or sometimes known as Kat, but today I'm going by Catherine because, yeah. So I will be reading my story that's in Pops, and it's called Before They Were Bars. I put my life together. I am a new person. I may not be the smartest, but I know what's right for me. I know my value. I know the feeling of being alone. I know how it feels to have your heart broken. I know how it feels to lose a parent mentally. I know the feeling of always watching your back from every angle. I know the feeling of being handcuffed, being shoved into a cop car, and being treated like a criminal. And I'm sick. I know the feeling when you feel the rush in your fist and face, but step back because you know what you are capable of doing. I know the feeling of carrying drugs in your backpack, hoping you won't get caught. I know the feeling of having your own mother cry, and you're the reason why. I know the feeling of punching the wall. I know the feeling of crying at night, picking yourself up the next day and pretending nothing ever happened. I know the feeling of hopping over the fence, fearing either you will get your dreams caught or will be chased down. I know the feeling of hitting rock bottom. I know the feeling of living that double life. Growing up with gangs, fights, drugs, gunshots, living in the projects is always risk-taking. Growing up, oh, she's like my little sister or not, I'm trying to hit that. You step out that door and step into the streets. You never know if you will make it home that night. Don't go outside those streets, Kathy. Where are you going? Who is that? What's in your backpack? What time are you getting home? You better get your butt home. I'm not playing with you. Words my mom would always repeat. She doesn't have to do that anymore. Mom, I'm sorry, but you don't know what I've done in those dark ages. 13 and 14, fights and drugs. I used to come home high. I used to hide everything from you until the day I got caught. This is LAPD with your daughter, Catherine Sakida, is at the Pacific Station for assault. This is the day my life changed. At 13, it was time to wake up. Age 14, Mom, I tried to get myself together. And you knew that because I cried and cried when you asked me what was wrong. I couldn't tell you. You only knew how my dad's addiction hurt me. Knowing I could be locked up scared me. Knowing my temper was dangerous scared me. At 15, to this day, I will never forget the look in my mom's eyes when the words came out. Catherine Sakida, case dropped, you're free to go. No juvenile hall time. No more. Locked up or dead. Those words shocked my mother, but mostly they shocked me. I don't want to be locked up or dead. I've stayed in school. I've been hanging out with positive friends. Mostly my best friend, Mariana. I have a shoulder to cry on. My second mother, Dana, who has watched me over since. the real life of being sick. I've stayed in school. I've been hanging out with positive friends and mostly my best friend, Mariana. I know I have a shoulder to cry on. My second mother, Dana, who has watched me over since I was 6, and watching her kids grow up made me feel like their big sister. And as they get older, I will be their role model and help them out the way their mother helped me. My 10th grader teacher, Mr. Danziger, who would always ask me all these questions to make my story feel real. Pops is my second home, where I write and listen to other people's stories. It is life-changing, and I put my life together. It's never too late.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Sick or not, I think we can all agree that was pretty wonderful. Can you give her another round of applause? Good morning. I'm Patrick Garrigan. I'm the Executive Director at Atlantic Live, the Atlantic's Events Division. And it is my pleasure to be able to welcome you to the second event of the Defining Justice series, which examines the experiences of women and children in the criminal justice system. Today, we'll dive in on race, gender, narrative, and justice. Whose stories get told and who gets to tell them? What are the experiences of the justice system that we rarely hear? We've had just a taste of the urgency and emotional weight of this issue from Catherine, and we're going to hear stories from many, many more young women across the course of this morning. Joining them on stage will be writers, researchers, actors, and many, many more. We'll hear an update on the criminal justice system and immigration reform here in California from the state's Attorney General. We want you to join the discussion as well, so please start thinking about questions. We'll be sure to take time at the end of each panel, and also join us online. We'll be using the hashtag #DefiningJustice, and you can find the Atlantic at the handle @AtlanticLive. That's @AtlanticLive, all one word. We are so grateful to Google for making today's event and this entire series possible within the Defining Justice series. We encourage you as well to make sure that you make time to check out the Google display back in the back of the house. There, they'll walk you through a virtual reality solitary confinement experience. And now with that bit of programming out of the way, want to walk you through what's up next. Here to talk about the unique challenges girls of color face, please welcome Monique Morris, author of Push Out, The Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools; Shirley Garcia, a peer mentor with Spirit Awakening, an arts organization for at-risk youth; and Ashay Jackson, a policy advocate at the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. The Atlantic's Allison Stewart is here to lead the conversation. Allison?
Good morning, everybody. I think we can agree that a woman didn't design director's chairs, so let's try to get comfortable. Monique, I'm going to ask you to set the table for us. We'll talk for a little bit, and then Ashay and Shirley will bring you into the conversation. You came with your own group. I like it. Push Out, the criminalization of black girls in schools. Monique, when did you realize this issue was so big and so prominent that you could fill a whole book about it?
When did I realize? I realized decades ago. I realized decades ago that there was enough material to examine around the criminalization of black girls, especially, and even more books that could be filled about other girls of color who are marginalized and impacted by the criminalization that this nation faces. The official story is I started doing this work about 4 years ago, but the real story is that about 2 decades ago, I wrote a street novel about a pimp. And when I was going into facilities to talk about the book, I clearly recognized that many of the girls that were in the space were survivors of sexual exploitation. They had narratives that were not being explored. No one was visiting them. There were a host of issues that I saw and that I recognized because I had lived through some of those experiences myself, and a critical difference was the ways in which I was able to use education as a protective factor that I know it can be, which these girls didn't have. There's also a series of data that came out within the last 5 years. There was once a time where they didn't collect data in ways that would be useful for analyses around these issues. But the US Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights released data in a way that could be mined for disaggregation around race and gender. And it showed that black girls were the only group of girls who were disproportionately experiencing school discipline across the continuum. That doesn't mean that other girls are not impacted by discipline decisions across the continuum. When I say that, I mean suspensions, expulsions, in-school and out-of-school suspensions, when I say suspensions, contact with law enforcement, arrests on campus, all of these things that push girls out. That have not been a part of the popular narrative that centered so intensely on the conditions of men and boys. And so there was a multiple marginalization that was occurring for girls that I knew could fill a book and more. And so I'm happy and grateful that we're now in a space where we can center this conversation about women and girls, because it forces us into other conversations about justice. And so for this to be part of the defining justice conversation, to me, is critically important.
You write about how this criminalization, I'm going to put it in quotes for this moment, because you say it can start as early as preschool.
Yes.
Tell me what can happen in preschool.
Well, there have been incidents across the country where girls, disproportionately black girls, have been arrested or placed in handcuffs for having tantrums, for speaking out, for taking candy from a teacher's desk. And we see these cases, and we've sort of recognized them as unique incidents, but what I wanted to do was demonstrate that they are part of a tapestry of harm and a pattern of abuse that occurs in schools, in spaces that should be locations for learning and healing. We see all this harm taking place. And so, with very young girls, we see black girls, again, disproportionately overrepresented among those who are experiencing suspensions. And I'm often in a space where, I question what we could possibly suspend a baby girl for, right? I'm like, having a tantrum, those of us who are parents or who have been around young children, we know that there are other ways to intervene than to call in law enforcement if a child is having a tantrum. But there have not been critical thought, really, around that, partly because we've treated the incidents that occur among girls as unique, separate, distinct entities, as opposed to part of a pattern of practice in an institution that is marginalizing our girls and young women.
Yeah, I want to follow up with some of the data you were talking about, is the perception of young black girls as being less innocent, as being more adult, the adultification of teenage girls. Practically, how does this manifest itself within the school, and then how does that bleed into the legal system?
Yeah. So when I talk about school to confinement pathways, usually I don't use the term school to prison pipeline. And I don't use school to prison pipeline because I want to challenge us to think about the nonlinear ways in which our young people are impacted by the criminal and juvenile legal systems. The consciousness and framework around this issue has focused so much on incarceration that we haven't explored all the other ways that criminalization seeps in. So when I talk about school to confinement pathways, what I'm talking about are the policies, practices, conditions, and the prevailing consciousness that facilitates harm and that criminalizes young people and makes them vulnerable to contact with the juvenile court or criminal legal system. What that looks like for girls and young women is that we operate in this society with various constructs of femininity, particularly black femininity and feminine expressions among girls and young women of color. And we see this hypersexualization play out. We see these ideas about whether they are combative or unusually strong in their spaces, which and other stereotypes, mammy, ratchet, etc., that impact how we're engaging and reading behaviors. Mm-hmm. And so as adults, I use the phrase age compression. We tend to see girls of color as more adult-like. And I shouldn't say we, because honestly, with that study, like, women of color know that these are babies, okay? And so it's really important to also isolate who is seeing our girls as young women prematurely,
Because
and
the way
how
people
that impacts the decision making that occurs with respect to their behaviors.
Right, so if you have a young girl who's 14 or 15, but someone is seeing her through a lens of, well, she should know better, she's an adult,
Exactly.
but she's not.
Exactly. So yeah, so the term of adultification and age compression is really about denying girls of color their childhood. It's about assigning more adult-like roles and responding to them as if they are little adults and therefore should know better, and therefore engaging in harsher treatments because there's little room for error. And we see with girls of color, there's little room for error. And when you talk to girls who have experienced school push-out, they describe, I would say, a pathway to confinement, a pathway to criminalization that has started with their own priming for victimization, the failure to recognize that trauma in the institutions and among the adults in their lives, and our social ideas about what constitutes good girlhood, in a way that if you step outside of, or you present outside of that accepted norm, you're vulnerable to harm.
Ashay and Shirley, I want to bring you into the conversation. Ashay, you work for the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. Explain to everybody what the goal of the coalition is and your work with it.
Okay, so I'll say something else first. I want to sort of share my viewpoint on the criminalization of
Sure, you want to go there first?
girls of color. When I think about the criminalization of girls of color in particular, I think about inadequate and failing systems. I think about the use of incarceration for the protection of girls and the use of incarceration as a distraction from system accountability. And so when I come as an advocate on these issues, it's by way of personal experience. And I really try to stay grounded in my truth, having firsthand experiences in many of these systems. I think that even in the work, sometimes you can become your platform can become shaken. And I think that events like this sort of bring me back down to my purpose in the work. The Anti-Recidivism Coalition is a nonprofit organization that provides supportive services for formerly incarcerated youth and adults. It is also a policy advocacy entity. And the idea is that people who have survived these systems are the best candidates for reform. And so we try to figure out ways to equip, educate, and really groom ourselves and other people who have experienced the system to lead the movement. And thank you. Our experiences do make us the experts, but oftentimes we are not put in the positions of power in order to make meaningful change. And so what I love about the organization that I serve is that we run it, essentially. We are given access and we are given very practical tools to do the work. And at the end of the day, we have taken on the task of and the responsibility of being positive examples for people who are still in the system, coming out and looking for, navigation tools.
You mentioned your personal experience, and I hope you're okay with sharing a little bit of this. I know you do when you give speeches and all. You had in your life a lot of the issues that come up that ultimately lead girls to be in situations where they might get pushed out of school. You're a survivor of abuse, you were in the foster care system, and you yourself were in the criminal justice system because you were gang affiliated. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I believe I have that you were arrested, detained for being accessory to murder and possession of a weapon. What happened to you after you were arrested?
Well, I'll say this. When I was 15, I was charged with a murder that my boyfriend committed. And even after the charges were reduced, there was still a very casual 14-year deal on the table for me. And the arresting officer tried to basically claim my identity in his report. I was a criminal to him, and at the time that I was fighting my case, I knew that the judge didn't know me. He didn't know that I had traveled many avenues of abuse before I arrived there. He didn't know that I was the daughter of a single mother who struggled to raise my sisters and I and to preserve her sanity. He didn't know that I had witnessed a boy die the night that I was arrested, and there was a very traumatic experience. He didn't know that I was in foster care, didn't know that a junior high school encounter expelled me from LAUSD and prematurely introduced me to the justice system. He didn't know that I was smart but unsupported. He just didn't know who I was, and I'm really trying to communicate how the lack of knowledge makes the solutions to the issues so distant. Yeah.
And back to the subject of Monique's work, how did your being pushed out, what do you think was the most dramatic impact on your life as the result of being pushed out of school?
Well, what it does is that because the events that took place in my life, within a matter of months, I was expelled from junior high and placed into foster care and, kind of like in and out of juvenile hall. And what happens is that you go from being a normal girl to being all these other things at once. You're a foster child, you're an alternative schooling pupil, and we all know about the troubling culture in alternative schools. You just don't know how to. Well, you don't really have a choice but to adjust to the changes, but you don't exactly know how to respond to them. For me, a lot of the changes took place in juvenile hall, and that was because I earned my GED and I was educating myself, but the truth was that the real issue hadn't been addressed. And so when I was released from juvenile hall after fighting that case for about 2 years or so, I started to experience some of the same issues again. I struggled with my addictions and toxic relationships, gang involvement, and it wasn't until my mentors sort of came and snatched me up and exposed me to a different set of possibilities that I was able to sort of realize the potential that I always kind of had. So.
And I'm going to get you a minute, Shirley. I haven't forgotten you. Tell people a little bit about these mentors, these people who intervened and really scaffolded and supported you.
Sure. So when I was in juvenile hall, there was a program called Inside Out Writers who came in and basically we used creative writing as an outlet, ways to sort of channel traumatic experiences, and it was really therapeutic and rehabilitative. When I was released, one of my mentors, she came in to my house and she took me to Century City where a group of entertainment attorneys had learned about some of my poetry, because when I was in juvenile hall, I wrote poetry. It was what I really love and found a lot of like my healthy concept. It was derived from that experience. Well, she came and got me, and they gave me a job that day. And what that did was that it showed me that these were people that I didn't know, and they didn't owe me anything, but they gave me a job. And over the years, I've actually been there for 9 years now. So I've been there for a very long time. And over the years, I found it really challenging that more than the act of criminalization, it's been like the devastating effects from it. I have found myself trying to reinvent myself and discover myself outside of experiences that I've had. And for me, that's meant educating myself. It's meant traveling. It's meant doing this advocacy work. And it's meant dedicating my life to reversing the narrative for girls of color, because as a graduate student, I feel that I have a responsibility, and sometimes I don't want to do the work, and sometimes I don't want to study, and sometimes I just feel really exhausted. But I know that many people are looking to me to set a positive example, and I have to use that as a guiding post. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about the mentorship program is because sometimes people will wring their hands about issues like this, and what can we do? Well, we know what we can do, we just have to fund what we can do, right? Yeah. Shirley, let's bring you into the conversation. You too were pushed out of school, and several schools over a course of a couple of different states. Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience, and now that you're a grown person, looking back on what really happened to you?
Well, I had been in and out of school since I can remember, since elementary school. And it came to a point where I was moving school so much that counselors didn't even want to go through my transcripts. I didn't get my transcripts handled until I was 20 years old. And it was because it was so much work. And I had been in so much systems that it just nothing seemed to work. I had gone from 3 different states, from California to Georgia to Kansas, and it was just the same thing over and over again. I had never been in the justice system until I was 17. So it was kind of like my life was leading up to something towards that, but it's been quite a change since then.
Can you remember what was the instance that caused you to get expelled at any of these places along the way?
Well, I think there was a lot of factors playing into it, environmental factors. Where I lived, I grew up in LA, where is a city where you literally are in between. It's the glamorous lifestyle, and then it's the side where nobody knows of, and it's, the freeway walls are up so high you don't even know what's on the other side. So that was my perspective of it, and I grew up in a situation where I was stuck in between choosing the good life or the bad life. And as a child to a single mother, I had so much free time, and that's where the trouble came.
Monique, as we listen to Shirley and Shay's stories, you have a daughter.
I have 2 daughters.
2 daughters, excuse me. One of them, Ebony, has worked with you on this project, and she's done some artwork. And I want to put up a couple of slides, and then we can walk through, because some of these slides are really great. They help illustrate some of the issues we're talking about. And I think it's great in your book, there's a guide for parents, for educators, for girls, to ask these kind of questions and go through this exercise. So this slide is about Jennifer. And this is about Jennifer being seen in many ways as a sex object. You're pretty. If I was a pimp, I would recruit you. Tell me a little bit more about your collaboration with your daughter on this.
Yeah, I was really grateful that my daughter Ebony stepped into this space with me. And one of the things that I was hoping to accomplish with Push Out was to engage people in the practice of listening to girls. And that's something that we're not accustomed to doing. We're accustomed to telling girls to be quiet or behave or sit still. Mm-hmm. So I wanted her to explore her agitation side and to be a part of this conversation however she felt she could be. And so, with Push Out, I agree with you, Shay, that the most effective advocates are those who are survivors of this system. And so I made it a point to center the narratives of girls, to the dismay of people who wanted me to engage in a policy discussion or a series of guided recommendations. We do that through the National Black Women's Justice Institute. But through Push Out, I really wanted to make sure that people heard the stories of girls as best I could communicate them, and felt a tremendous responsibility to do that with authenticity. So Jennifer's story is a story of a girl who was raped at the age of 12 and was put out on the street by her rapist. And she struggled. She struggled in foster homes. She struggled to make meaning of her life. She struggled to make meaning of her identity as a student. She was, as she said, forced to drop out of the 6th grade. As a result of this tremendous trauma that was not recognized by the adults in her space. There were fights that would occur, and the institution that was charged with guiding her learning only responded to the fights and not what might have been behind the fights. So there was no rigor around her discussion, and I really love and appreciate Jennifer for sharing her story, because the unfortunate thing about this is that I found Jennifer in a detention center. And so we meet many of our girls who are experiencing the greatest trauma behind bars. Yeah. We meet them after they've been incarcerated because they've been traumatized, because they are survivors of abuse. And that just has to change. But the only way for us to, I think, fully explore what has to change is to listen to their stories and understand the unique vulnerabilities. Now, Jennifer was also a foster child. And so because she was bouncing around from school to school, she was placed in homes where her foster father ended up behaving like a predator, that there were just ways in which she was triggered continuously in this journey for her own recovery and in this struggle for her to engage and recognize her own self.
I'm going to ask you for another slide, and we're going to take questions in just a moment from anyone in the audience, so put on your thinking caps. And this is a question for all three of you. We all know that parents, caregivers, loved ones have the talk with young African-American men about police. Do you think we're at a place where we need to have the talk with girls about school, or would that be adding to the issue? What do you think of Shay? That you would have a talk with a teenage girl about, like, look, this could happen to you in school. If your teacher responds this way, you need to respond this way. Or is that the wrong way to go about it? I'm just curious opinions.
I think that it's a conversation that needs to be had. I mean, campus culture has changed a lot. And I think that as young girls of color, that we are tough. We are resilient people, and we endure a lot, we overcome a lot. But we really have to be, like, education is always the answer. We need to know, we need to be prepared, we need to sort of have these conversations with ourselves sometimes and really try to sort of understand our thoughts and our feelings and our reaction to certain things. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, I guess.
What do you think, Monique? You ready to go?
Yeah, because, I have these conversations all the time. I think the conversation, though, and the conversations that I've been having with my own daughters and with other girls in my world is about safety. And we have come to understand safety, particularly in our advocacy work and in our, sort of public policy work, as a function of how individuals are either killed by the state in the public, or how interactions with institutions renders people vulnerable to being locked up. Mm-hmm. My definition of safety is really about how we protect and engage the emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being of individuals. So conversations about safety and protection in schools has to do absolutely with how you are perceived and how you present, but it also has to do with how you maintain a safety around and against sexual assault, how some of the conversations that we've been having now more robustly than previously around harassment in public spaces, that impacts girls too in schools. Many of the girls that I've interacted with and continue to work with are survivors of sexual harassment and assault in school. And so the conversation about safety is also about that. Okay.
Do we have any questions from the audience? And I'm going to ask the AV guys to roll through the next slide so people can see some more of Ebony's work. I think it kind of speaks for itself. Do we have questions from the audience? Anybody? Oh, there's a mic in the back. There's a woman right up front here. Oh, thanks.
Okay.
Okay. Somebody's going to bring it to you in just a moment. There's a woman in the back.
Hi. My name's Suzanne, and very nervous asking a question, but I am a white mother of a black child. And when you said that it starts as early as preschool, I mean, it started in Mommy and Me for us. I mean, she was treated a lot differently than the other kids, and, kids bite and pinch, and when she did it, the consequences were much stricter than all the other kids. And I'm wondering how, I talked to my daughter, I mean, obviously then I didn't, but now I do, but how can we educate white people on this? Because I would talk to people and they were like, oh, that's not really happening. And I'm like, no, it's really happening. And so I'm just, if you have any insight on that, how do we get that conversation going so that it's not always about talking to my kid about how to protect herself, but about talking to the people that might do her harm.
And what do you think about in terms of also introducing this perhaps into educational curriculums for teachers and caregivers?
There are a number of guided decision tools to help educators and others who are interacting with people outside of their own communities, racial communities. I do not expect women of color and girls of color to do the labor of white women. And I know that's not what you're asking, but I feel like I need to say that because that is sometimes an expectation in this conversation. And so it is important to recognize, and in my experience, the conversations that white people have among other white people are the opportunities to explore some of these biases and to commit to doing the internal work to explore what it is. One of the things that I was going to say around age compression is that many of the adults, the majority of the adults who were participants in the study that was just released by Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality about adultification or age compression, those adults were white. And so they're looking, there's an external gaze upon the growth and expression of girls of color that we have to interrogate. But people of color have been interrogating these things for generations and generations. And so it's really important, especially today, to really engage in committing to have those kinds of deep conversations, not just about what's happening to your child of color, but also recognizing that there's a lot of deep internal work that has to be done to explore structures of power that perpetuate systems of inequality and inequity. One of my favorite sayings, if I might, is from Dr. Martin Luther King when he challenges us to think about power, and he frames power as, or power at its best, really being about implementing the demands of justice, and justice being about power correcting everything that stands against love. We think about love as something that is a personal thing. I love that your essays and your poetry were about love, and because that is a powerful tool, not just an emotion, tool for examining many of these systems and conditions that we're talking about today.
So we're going to end on your idea of do the work. We all need to do the work. Let's thank our panel.
Incarcerated and their families over the holidays. So we have their families come and watch an open workshop. It's so much fun. So fun.
Do you track some of the individuals once they're released?
Yeah, so some people who've returned are now our teaching artists. So our re-entry program's run by somebody who was incarcerated and did our program inside. I think we have 6 teaching artists now. Yay, welcome.
Please welcome to the stage award-winning director and producer, Ava DuVernay. She's joined by Ta-Nehisi Coates, Atlantic National Correspondent and author of the book, We Were 8 Years in Power.
So I have a confession to make. I watched the film I think is the reason for us really being here. Well, there's the 13th, obviously, also. But the dramatic film that is the reason for us being here, Middle of Nowhere. And I just watched it yesterday. And I actually had an event last night. And it was a serious mistake to watch that film before the event. I already told Ava this. That film is remarkable. It's one of the greatest films I've ever seen, and I was not right for the rest of the day. I went to school with the cinematographer, and I'm gonna stop raving in a second. And I'm gonna let you talk. I'm gonna let you finish. But I went to school with Bradford Young, who was a cinematographer for the film, and Bradford's great. And I was texting him like all the way through, you know what I mean, about just how remarkable this piece was. And so, Ava, when we were behind stage, you were beginning to talk about the process of actually writing, and it actually sounded like journalism to me, like it was an act of journalism. Can you just maybe just talk a little bit about that for us?
Yes, well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here with this one, the genius, indeed. So literally, he's saying he watched my film, and I'm like, you did? What did you think? But yeah, Middle of Nowhere is a film that I made before Selma. A lot of folks think I came out of the womb with Dr. King on my mind before Selma. And it was about the invisible victims of incarceration, the women, the mothers, the daughters, the sisters, the wives. And so it follows, a woman who is struggling with her husband's incarceration in her life. You really are not in the prison. You never go inside the facility beyond where she goes, and you basically are with her through her day-to-day and her experience. And yeah, so I wanted to know what that was. So talked to several hundred women over the course of 3 years writing the script. And the stories broke my heart and made me, they were like fuel.
Can I just pause you right there for a minute? What was that conversation like? Like, do you just go, hey, I'm making a film about this, would you just talk to me about?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I want to get it right. I'm making a film about you, you know what I mean, of women like you, and I want to get that right and not just read about it, but really know. So I would hear just incredible stories of fortitude and faith and a connectiveness that the women really took on the burden of keeping that connection. And I thought that was remarkable in its, in the reality and in what it is, but also remarkable that we don't comment on it enough and unpack it enough in terms of what women, mostly women of color, are doing to maintain the bonds to our loved ones behind bars.
When we think about incarceration in this country, obviously there's a lot of focus on African-American men. African-American, not to slight, the incarceration experience of African-American women and women of color at large, but African-American men, I think just because they comprise such an outsized number, and there's less focus, on women of color who are incarcerated, but also the effects of incarceration and how it redounds outwards towards families and how it affects families. And I wonder where the impetus for you came to, as you said, not necessarily put the focus on the prisons, but to talk about the effects outside.
Yeah, well, I've been trying to, in different work, address the overall prison industrial complex and its effects. So with Middle of Nowhere, it was on the families who are left behind. 13th did a certain thing. Queen Sugar is a show where the lead character is a formerly incarcerated man, and so you see the effects on his family, in particular his child. And just trying to find different ways to bring this conversation into the culture beyond prison is a place where bad people go, but to just create some nuance there in terms of the long-lasting impact and ripple effects and echoes that it has, not only on communities of color, but within families and the community at large.
How much of this came out of, well, let me back up a little bit. As a young person, and particularly as a child, so let's say up through, like age 18 or 20, what was your interaction like with the carceral state? What was your understanding of it? How much of Middle of Nowhere came out of questions that maybe you either saw or in your own sphere?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Compton, and I always, oh, what's up, CPT? That's up. What's up? Let's not do it here, because we could do the whole thing right here. But I always was fascinated by two things growing up: the homeless and people behind bars. I would be driving around with my mom around the city, and I would just say to her, and I remember it, and she reminds me, I would say, if I was homeless, I would put my, stuff in there, right? Or like, oh, if I was homeless, they're giving like free samplers over here, so I go get some food here, right? I was always trying to figure out, for some reason, how I would survive in the world if I was homeless. And also, I was constantly and totally preoccupied with people who were just missing in my community, people who, one, day I saw, and then the next day they were gone, and where they went. And so these were people on my block. These were brothers and fathers of good friends that just disappeared. And so
Did you understand as a Black person that this was happening in a way that was different than in other communities and other places?
Not as a child. I grew up in a Compton that was it was like Samoan, Latino, Thai, Black. It wasn't just Black. Compton on the edge, right near Linwood. And so it was affecting everybody. So I didn't really equate it with communities of color or Black people or anything. I just knew as a child people were disappearing, and I was told that they were going to jail. And I would see, I grew up in a place where the ghetto bird was common. Do you all have ghetto bird in New York? So where, just that sound of them coming so low overhead was so common. So when I look back and I see the ways in which I would see harassment and process that and process people, kind of disappearing and being locked up, it just began this preoccupation that I began to study as I got older, and the preoccupation has never left me.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, like the things, like when you grow up like that, the things you take to be every day. I grew up in West Baltimore. I was born in 75. And as a young child, probably before 10, I just thought the helicopter came out every night. Like, I just thought that was a thing that happened, like, in everywhere, across America, they send the ghetto bird out, you know what I mean? I didn't even have that terminology, but I just thought it happened, you know what I mean? And
the thing that's interesting to me, and I just learned more about, of course, reading your books, but also he and I were both featured on this show called Finding Your Roots a couple of weeks ago, and I was learning more about your father. Were these issues like talked about? Was there definition given to what you were hearing? Because that never happened for me. Like, in my house, there was not like not black nationalists, but nobody was defining what that was. It was just an experience that was washing over us. Did you get that kind of instruction?
First of all, I see how you flipped it on me.
This is not an interview, it sets conversation together.
I peeped that, I did peep that. Yeah, it was. My dad had... you know what I think about with Finding Your Roots? We were just talking about, like, the things that did not make it on the show, right?
Right.
And one of the things, like, it's so interesting because for my family, it's basically two lines. And on one line was this kind of strivers, Black story, coming out of, free Black experience. Oldest ancestor had been free in, like, 1820. And on the other side, which they did not really show, was, like, what people refer to, and I just want to be clear, I don't refer to it this way, but the poster board for what people would call Black pathology. So it's like my great-grandfather died in like a meat packing plant, it's like crushed to death. I didn't know any of this. Like I found this out on the show. Wow. Grandfather was homeless and tried to bum a cigarette off of somebody on the street. A dude punched him, he hit the ground and just died. So there was this accumulation of traumas, and these were folks, unlike my mom's family, who had come out of Virginia, never really had anything. And I perceived the difference between those two sides of the family as a child. Even though my mom had grown up in the projects, as my mom used to say, they were a different kind of poor. It's levels, you know what I mean? Even within poverty, it's levels, And my dad, I always thought, like, he was reacting to that. He was reacting to these accumulation of traumas by going into the Panther Party and becoming this person. So by the time I was born in 75, yeah, it was names on everything. I often got the names before I actually got the experience. Like, I can remember, and I don't know if you had this, but, like, being a child, and, like, my dad and older Black people saying, like, the white man. The white man won't let you have that. The white man gonna do this, white man. And I used to be like, is there actual white man? You know what I mean? Who's doing?
He's busy.
Right, he's busy, He's clearly very, very busy. So yeah, I had the concepts, before I moved forward. The thing that's always interesting for me, though, is for people who don't necessarily grow up like that, what's the moment where you begin to say, okay, these cats who are disappearing have some sort of relationship to a broader political conversation? As we would say, what was the moment of consciousness for you, if you had that name?
It wasn't until I got to college and started reading more. you know, a professor once told me you're going to go through your red, black, and green phase. Red phase, you're going to be so angry, boiling, just angry. Black phase, everything's black, and if it's not black, it's not right. And then a green phase where you just kind of mellow out, and you take the knowledge and you stay on edge but not enraged. And if you can find that place, that's the place where we have the greatest chance of survival, is the way that it was explained to me. So I always kind of think about that. But I still, one day I wake up in the black phase, one day I wake up in the red phase these days. Thought it was making progress, but, you know.
I live there.
Where? Which one?
Somewhere between red and black. I don't think I don't get to green. I don't get, unless I'm out here and the weather's nice. And see, when you're in California, you can, it's a different thing. You can't live in green. You know, you on the East Coast, man. You know what I'm saying? You stay in that, you know what I mean? Just on 10. You know, totally on 10. So, like, one of the things like people ask me is I get these questions. I say, well, you know, Ta-Nehisi, writing this sort of way, you know, these issues, what do you do for self-care? What's your self-care routine? I said my self-care is writing. Like, I'm funneling actually all of that, you know, that rage into the writing. And then once I'm writing, I'm okay. And I'm wondering if, is this like, does the art exist in the same relation to you? Is it like what if you couldn't say these things? What if you couldn't tell these stories? What if you knew them? What if you had all the imagination that your work clearly shows you have, but you did not have the opportunity to make that manifest? What does that world look like for you?
I mean, that's pain. That's painful. So I'm grateful that I've been able to find my way through that before anybody was looking. Like, we talk about Middle of Nowhere, nobody's seen that movie. But well, few people. This room.
I saw it last night, so
yeah. But you know, it didn't reach any kind of critical mass, and yet it's just as meaningful to me, the experience of making it, what it means in the world, where the place that it sits within me is the same as, you know, a huge $130 million Disney movie. If not more, you know, it's everything that I make. I try to choose things that have my name on it. I don't have children. I don't plan to have children. These things are my children. This is what I leave behind. This is what I want to say. I did with my time here, and so yeah. No, I don't so much think about how it's going to resonate or live in the world. It keeps me. It's my survival. I mean, it would be pain if I wasn't able to do it. So when I think of, you know, the women artists and people of color artists and people who are marginalized who aren't allowed, and I say allowed because the filmmaking medium requires more than some of the other mediums that are much more free and flexible, like writing. To make a film, you need more than yourself and your pen and paper. You need resources, right? You need even simple things. You need a few things to get started, and those have traditionally been withheld. So it's a beautiful time in terms of technology and the way that things are moving, that we're able to have more access. We sit here at this event that's part of, you know, the Google ecosystem, and all of that technology and access. It makes a difference and it means something. So more of us can take that pain and make it into something beautiful.
So, like, as a very, very prominent, you know, African-American woman in film, and at this point, you know, doing the kind of movies that certainly 30 years ago, 10 years ago, like, you didn't really see black people, let alone black women, like, really doing. Can you, like, just put yourself on the couch for a minute and talk about what did you have? And I don't mean talent. Like, obviously, you're extremely talented, extremely intelligent, but I'm thinking more like approach, attitude. Like, what accounts for you? Well, see, I think, just let me.
Yeah, tell me about you. You could be on the couch and
I could.
Show me the answer to the question.
So, okay, like, if I thought about myself, right, I would say that writers in my field of nonfiction are always thinking about how can I shape this narrative to address white people, not because they're white, but because they're the majority of the readers. This is who I have to talk to. Because of actually how where you went earlier about how I came up, right? Because of the household I came up in, because of the politics of that household. Even, as I grew and kind of matured out of some of the politics, the basic notion that you ain't got a right for them. Like, your world is valid, you know what I mean? And if you end up, telling that story just to a room full of 5 people, that's fine. Right. That's fine. Just because they control stuff doesn't mean that they actually know stuff. Those are 2 different things. But see, you have to get resources. It's different. It's different. Like, I could, do my writing, print it out, and then, distribute it. It's a much lower threshold in order to do it. And so, like, when you have to go and negotiate and get people to really invest, right, it's a different thing.
Yeah, lower threshold, I see it as more of a freer form because anyone can enter in. I think, in film, I started in the independent film scene, the Black independent film scene, and I was lucky that I was able to come up on the heels of Haile Garima and Julie Dash and Charles Burnett and all of the people who said, the mainstream did not allow them, the academy, any of the traditional institutions kept these people out. They did not acknowledge their work. They did not think the images that they were making and the stories that they were telling were valid. I work in an industry built upon the foundation laid by the film Birth of a Nation. Like, this is the context for the very work that I'm doing. And so there's, other ways that were always found to make these images and tell these stories outside of that. If you look at Haile, you went to Howard, you know what Haile has done. And so when I started with making films for $5,000 and $100,000 and $200,000 and cobbling it together, I was more than satisfied to take these films on the Black Film Festival circuit. I was like, this is fantastic. I'm gonna make my little films and I'm gonna take it to rooms like this. And I did that for 4 years and it was all I wanted. It was all I wanted. And I still think of those times, and I still go back to those festivals every chance that I get, at least once a year. In between everything else, I go to a Black film festival. Can you go back in the same way, though? Because you're different. No, because because you never have those first films again that you're so afraid to show. And you're still afraid to show them all the time, but just the not knowing if you could even do it. I remember those times, but what I remember more than anything is the audiences. I think what you're speaking of brings up the idea of audience. Who are we writing for? Who are we making our films for? And the value of audience and who is out there in the dark. Who's reading it and who's out there and who's placing value on it. And those are all things that come out in the wash of making it for me. I've had to stay very recently got a bit schizophrenic in terms of who I'm making the thing for, because I had a very clear idea in my head of who I was making Selma for. I was making Selma for my father and Black people in Lowndes County and Alabama, making sure that they saw themselves. And I want everybody to enter into that, but it was for a specific, same with Middle. You know what I mean? Same with I Will Follow, the films before that. But Wrinkle in Time is different. You know what I mean? Wrinkle in Time is the first time that I'm playing with an idea. Even Queen Sugar, it's very specific. I love it when all kinds of people tell me they love it, but I have a target. The Wrinkle the Wrinkle in Time target is for the first time, my target is, it's like all those lights up there, there are all these colors, trying to hit everybody. And when I say everybody, that doesn't mean just the larger kind of white world. Like, I was on a reservation last year, and it's like, if you think Black people have it bad in terms of representation, or Latino people, like, when's the next time you saw a Native family doing anything? You know what I mean? So it's like, in this, I'm trying to make it so that anyone that watches this film, anyone, sees a little bit of themselves in it. Our lead little boy, who in the book is he's like a little red-haired boy, is a Filipino-American actor. Storm Reed, the main girl, is, a Black African-American actress. One of the misses, these ethereal beings that come to guide the little girl through the universe, is a Southeast Asian woman, Mindy Kaling. Disney did great by allowing me to try to hit all those targets, and they want to hit all those targets too. But that's a different muscle for me, because I never have been that. Do you feel like when you are writing for your books are different than, do you feel like your books are different from, no?
It's always the same.
Who are you writing for?
I think of when I was, say, young and in college, and I was at Howard University, and I was, and to go see a film like Sankofa. I was at Howard when that came out. You were surrounded by so much intellect, and not the same kind of intellect, like differing, ways of seeing the world. Bradford was there, and like that was not represented out in the broader world at that time in any real sort of way, and having feelings about the world based on that, and wondering, am I crazy? Like, because this is not represented in any sort of mainstream outlet or organ. I think about writing to say to that person, now you're not crazy. You're not, the things you feel. Like when I wrote, like when I did The Case for Reparations, when I wrote that, the feeling was, yes, you've been robbed. You knew it the whole time. You were right. Like that sneaking feeling you had, it was, when the hairs went up on your back, you were right. And here's the math to, actually show.
So you're saying you're writing for Black people?
I am, yeah, I am. But I don't, obviously, I don't know a single writer or a single, filmmaker that would say, I don't want people to come and see.
Not at the exclusion of a
Yeah, absolutely not. No. It's
your voice in your mind's eye, in your creative mind's eye that sits in the back, when you're engaged in this and you're writing, you are writing to inform and to validate and to uplift, like what you said.
No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. But these are the people I knew, when I was being formed. And so it's very hard to think of it in any sort of way. I have to ask you something. And if you don't want to answer, I completely understand. But, I'm thinking about it, and it's slightly off topic. How have you processed this news around Harvey Weinstein?
Oh, wow. I thought this was the women and children behind bars. And I'm so sorry, we haven't talked very much about that, but
if you don't want to answer, I
will. No, I'm happy to answer. It wasn't shocking, not in the instance of him. I mean, some of the revelations have been really like, wow, the stories are jaw-dropping. I always knew him around town. The word is that he was gruff, aggressive, did anything to get his way. But I don't find that to be different from a lot of, the people in power in Hollywood. So I never really defined that as differently as how so many of the others work. I've not had any context as a Black woman in the industry being approached in that kind of aggressive sexual manner by white men in power. And now Black men in power are a different thing. And so that's like completely foreign to me, hearing the stories of those women experiencing that. But I think for me, it's a larger question of, and what I've really been talking to friends about is, what have we allowed in the industry to happen and say, oh, that's just the way it is. I started in this as a Black woman filmmaker making films for less than $100,000, right? In the independent scene, the Black independent scene. Then you move in kind of the white independent scene, the Sundance and stuff, and then they start liking your stuff. Then you move in, you find yourself working with studios, and you gradually are moving through it. Then you find yourself in rooms with folks that you hear these stories about, and what are you to do? This is the way it is. You hear that this is the way it is. And I am having to unpack that and say, I walked into it and accepted that that's the way it was, and just kind of got in line with, look, I work in a den of sharks, of all these sharks, and I just have to try to find a way to get my work through and squeeze it out. But that perhaps there's more that we need to be doing. There's more that we can be saying. I'm really interrogating the idea of silence and when we are quiet, because the only thing that we have are our voices, especially now when the very things that we hold dear are slipping off of their foundation in this society. And so I just feel like at any point when you say something that's wrong, what this has shown me, Weinstein, Trump, all of this is, I just gotta say something. I gotta open my mouth and say something. In whatever way, through my work, through a tweet, in talking with someone, just not let things slide, even the little things, because the little fissures become cracks and divides. So that's what it's really meant to me. I mean, yes, the women, their horrible stories, and I stand in solidarity with the women, and, but even further to that, I feel like some of the things that are being done in terms of the stripping of his memberships and affiliations are cosmetic. they're making everybody feel good, like we did this, but you really didn't do anything. You know, and so until we as an industry decide that we're really going to do something, and I say we because I participate in it, then I feel like it's a lot of cover as opposed to real foundational work.
Yeah, no, I think like one of the really revealing things about this for me is how structural it was. So a guy has like spies who are investigating the journalists. You know,
that came out like yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. There are people who are setting up the meetings. There's a structure to it. There's not just one guy, you know, going around groping people. Right. You know, it's an entire, you know,
architecture around
architecture.
It. Yeah.
Yes, of power. And I think, you know, just further to your point here, people have difficulty with structure. They have no problem, as you say, stripping away membership. This is a bad guy. But I just, you know, and I'm not from here, I wonder what is the architecture of a town that allows for the construction of something like that over a number of years. So,
right. You know. I'm really interested because, you know, live here, work here every day, and interested in how people on the outside of it looking in are seeing it. I mean, I don't think it's dissimilar to kind of the structure of anything, of when we're talking about, you know, the carceral state and incarceration and all that goes around it. You know, it's so over there, right? That people are able to kind of look at it and comment on it and feel bad about it and donate something and watch 13th and be like, that is horrible. It moved me so much, and God bless you. And usually my question is, so, you know, it was made to activate. It was made to trigger. It was made to, you know, ask you to face yourself and to ask how you are participating in this in so many ways. And it is made to make it clear. You can no longer say you didn't know. You can't say you didn't know anymore because now you know. And so if you now decide not to do anything, then that is clearly and squarely on you. And you were on the wrong side of history with this. It's as if, you know, during slavery, you know, you're sitting over here and people could say, I didn't know all those bad things were going on. I just didn't know about it. But we've now said it's very clear you know. I put it on Netflix so it has the hugest platform it can have in terms of, it was released in 190 countries on the same day. I can see who watched it. Right. I know how many people have watched it and where they live. And so they've watched it. And so what are we doing now? And what I regret is that I feel like, we got to talk about Trump. You got to say something about him. Everybody wants to hear you say something. But I feel like we were on an edge. We were on especially around this issue, the bipartisan support that we explore and kind of interrogate and try to get underneath and see what that really was, and really just showing what was happening on the grassroots level and the academic level and historically around this, and championing the voices like Angela Davis who've been out in front of this for decades and decades. And the great work of Michelle Alexander, and just all what everyone has been doing. And then it just feels like when I watch 13th now, I think I made it in such a place of hope that there would be a forward movement. And it seems like even the things that are in the film now, it's a backslide from even that moment. And it wasn't even a year ago. The film didn't even come out a year ago.
Yeah. It always felt like an illusion to me, not the 13th, but the notion that there was this moment of bipartisan hope around this stuff, and it always felt like an illusion because the carceral state came out of deep biases and preferences within bone-deep stuff that goes back to the founding of the country, and the notion that folks would suddenly get religion.
Right. Right.
I had questions about that.
Right.
I always had questions.
So we asked those questions and trying to figure out what's under that whole bipartisan piece of it. But the bottom line is you need whatever they were. It's just like Hollywood, stripping memberships and doing all the surface things that are kind of the first step to maybe some real foundational work. That stuff was happening. The cursory stuff was happening.
But the structure.
The structure was, but I felt like it could move in that place. And now
you're
not even having the cursory stuff. Now you're backsliding on that.
I mean, you got to think about the size of this. That when from the report, okay, so I think we are at roughly 750 per 100,000. That's our carceral rate. This is, as I'm sure everybody in this room knows, that's, the highest carceral rate in the world. We have significantly less people than China. We incarcerate significantly more people than China. And this period, began right after the Civil Rights Movement, which I'm sure is just a coincidence. There's no reason why that would happen. There's a sociologist, Devitt Page, and she did this research, and if we decarcerated back to the level where we were in the early 70s, which is about 200 per 100,000, which is where the rest of the Western world is, the number of people who would be out in the world is more than, you could fill all the fast food jobs in America 5 times over with those people. You're talking about warehousing. I'm not being rhetorical, you really are. You're talking about labor problems. You're talking about white people in these rural areas who do not have jobs, and so you construct basically a jobs program. You're talking about black people who you don't want to give jobs to, so you ship them away, out of the neighborhoods. That sounds extreme, and I would have thought that was extreme, some years ago. But there's quite a bit of research on this to show how do you wind that back, man? How do you? I mean, this is like.
This is what these people are here to figure out. I mean, this is what we all have to figure out, and especially in this time and space that we're in, so much to hold on to by way of, someone just tweeted the other day that social media and our access to technology has done more to advance the images of black people, positive images of black people, than 120 years of the film industry. Right? Just us in this moment being able to share ourselves with one another, right? Our thoughts freely, unencumbered by, the mechanism by which we usually had to go through to speak in film, in literature, and what have you, Self-publishing, independent film, social media, there's more of us out there, authored by us, which is so important. And so I feel like that's going to be the key. It's the voices being asserted dynamically, independently, boldly, bravely, and by any means necessary in any way that we can.
Right. Well, as Ava said, not letting anything slide. Ava ain't letting nothing slide. So
you're not either.
Oh, thank you. We could do this all day, but thank you.
They're saying time's up.
They're kicking us
thank
off.
You very
thank
much.
you guys.
Appreciate it.
Hello. So I'm going to read a piece that I wrote, and it's from the book Cracked Mask, and it's called A Mother of Four. Oh, my name is Bianca. She watches her oldest daughter being a victim of domestic violence and giving birth of a beautiful baby girl. She watches her son being taken away into the system I call hell. She watches her third daughter trying to become something powerful, but struggles to get there. She watches her youngest daughter struggle and get into trouble in school, but tries to get better. She watches us fall, but she's always there to catch us. She watches her seeds turn into beautiful flowers. She's a mother of four. She fights for what she believes in and who she loves. When anyone or a family member tries to cause her kids problems, she's always there to defend them. The four so-called wonderful kids always argue with the mother, thinking their arguments won't hurt her, but realize it does. Even though we all fight with each other, she's always there for us when we need her. She's a mother of four. She's our mother and hero. I love you.
For a conversation on the state of criminal justice and immigration in California, please welcome State Attorney General Javier Becerra, here with the Atlantic's Ron Brownstein.
Good morning. From the personal to the policy and the politics. I want to ask you about a bunch of stuff going on in California, but let me start by talking about and getting your view on the kind of underlying philosophy that we're seeing at the federal level with Attorney General Sessions, essentially creating a construct in which more criminal justice reform means less public safety, right? Kind of pulling back from the idea of the Justice Department policing, monitoring the practices of police departments, urging the prosecutors, requiring prosecutors to demand the maximum possible sentence. And he seems to, and underpinning all of that is his argument that these approaches are necessary because the alternative means more crime. Is he right?
Well, he's absolutely wrong, but first I wanted to say hi, Ron, and thank you for letting me be part of this program on defining justice. What I believe he's doing is he's taking us back to those days where we let the boogeyman drive our policy, and it's one of those situations where we seem to want to lock up everything, our fears, our insecurities, our fear of the unknown, the foreign, and we want to look up those prejudices that we see in others, and the easiest way to do that is to keep them out, keep them away. And it seems like the more sheltered you've been in your life throughout your years, the more you want to lock up those things that you don't understand and that seem unknown to you. And it's a policy that simply drives us into poverty, because what we do is we spend so much money keeping folks locked up in jail. 95% of these folks are going to come out of jail. They don't stay locked up forever. And what we've done is we've institutionalized this revolving door that sends them back, right back where they came out of. And it's that pipeline that we're trying to break today of sending young kids, mostly men of color, young men of color, from school straight into the prisons.
This is the biggest, bluest state in the country, as emphatically Democrat as any large state. And yet there are still, as you say, lots of questions about how it deals with all of these interrelated issues around that pipeline. We've done Atlantic events in a lot of different communities around the country that are trying to shift their bail system from financial capacity to risk. How do you rate California on that front?
We're going to get there. We're going to stop. We will stop placing people in detention pre-trial based solely on their ability to pay. And we'll get to the point where we're trying to determine whether you're rich or poor, if you should stay locked up before your trial based on your potential to harm society if you were to be allowed to be out on the street. And so whether you are white or black, brown, whatever your color, whatever your income, it should be the decision on whether you should stay in detention during the phase before your trial should be based on what kind of harm you might cause to society, not on how much money you have.
How do you get from here to there? I mean, what is the mechanism by which we get from where we are to that? These are decisions made mostly now, these are made at the county level, correct?
Yeah, we need to make sure we put the resources into place to provide the alternatives. So house detention, sort of like this guy Manafort is getting, he gets to go out, get out of jail, and he doesn't have to worry about spending his time waiting for trial in jail because he's got enough money that he can bail himself out. And so he's under house arrest. There are ways to try to make sure you provide alternatives to just keeping people in a jail. And we have to make sure that the counties have the resources to make that possible. We have to make sure judges are going through a thorough evaluation of that individual and his or her abilities to be allowed to go back. Principally what you're doing is you're trying to look at, are there ties to the community? Does a person have a job? Is a person going to school? What are the things that give you some sense of security that the person will show up for trial?
One thing I didn't know before I started preparing for this was that your office has the authority, when requested by a judge, to intervene in a case-by-case basis on bail determinations. And you have, in fact, been intervening in some of those cases. Talk a little bit about what you're doing and why.
We've essentially returned cases to the trial courts and said that we would not agree with the bail setting because there wasn't a thorough evaluation of the individual defendant's ability to meet the bail standard and to be allowed to be released pre-trial. And so that within the confines of the laws that exist right now, we're trying to make clear that at least the Department of Justice will not sign off on any bail that is based solely on income and not on the person's ability to return for court when required based on the person's characteristics.
And it's obviously a limit to how many of those cases you can do. Is the hope to basically send a signal to kind of change the way judges are dealing with this without you having to intervene?
Yeah, it's just repeating what our Supreme Court Justice in California, our Chief Justice, just said, that the current bail system is unsafe and unfair because it's based on income. And we're essentially reflecting what the Chief Justice just said, and that is that just because you require someone to pay a $300,000 bail in order to be released before trial doesn't guarantee that that person who bails out is going to not commit a crime. And so it should be based on the ability to ensure that the public safety will be secured by allowing an individual to go back into the streets awaiting trial. Remember, you're not convicted. You're not guilty of anything until you've been tried, yet so many people are actually being incarcerated before they ever had a trial, simply because they don't have the income to bail themselves out.
Let me ask you about another area. You sponsored legislation, AB 284, which will require the DOJ to do a comprehensive statewide assessment of all officer-involved shootings in 2015 and 2016. That did not pass the legislature. What happens next? Can you advance this idea on your own in any way, or do you simply have to wait and reintroduce the bill again?
We're going to go at it again. We had support in the State Assembly, and we're hoping we can get it passed as well in the State Senate, where what we hope we'll do is we'll, for the first time on a actually first-in-the-nation basis, provide a statewide template to show what's going on with these officer-involved shootings. So rather than act based on anecdotal evidence or based on just one snippet of a video, we're actually trying to determine what's causing these officer-involved shootings and base our actions on the data that we collect from previous years of these incidents that have occurred. And so we're hoping that we can find that there are some best practices where some agencies are doing far better than others, and we can tackle this issue without trying to let the emotions on all sides sort of drive what we try to do.
So is your next step to reintroduce the legislation, or do you have administrative mechanisms you can pursue?
I have administrative mechanisms, but they're not complete. They don't let me do that wholesale evaluation, and so we need the legislation to give us the authority and the resources to go ahead and do that evaluation, to really look closely at a macro level of all these incidents, so we can try to give people the best assessment of what's going on.
Because like the federal Justice Department, you do have pattern and practices authority, right, to investigate police departments. What is your kind of guidelines on how you intend to use that authority?
Well, we're right now, at least the publicly known, are 3 investigations, pattern and practice investigations that we're doing. One is relates to the Kern County Sheriff's Department. Another relates to the Bakersfield Police Department, and another, which I think is very important, relates to the Stockton Unified School District Police Department. And we're trying to work something out with the agencies rather than simply sue, so we can try to change what we consider a pattern and practice of going after young folks, not based on just objective characteristics, but on who these kids are.
So you had another initiative that did pass, right? AB was a 953, which requires the local law enforcement officials and certain state to specify, to provide data on all law enforcement stops. You are now writing regulations to implement that. What and when can people expect to see?
So California, once again, leading the way, is going to be the first state that does, at this level, with so many people, 40 million people. We will now require our law enforcement officers to record every stop that they make and indicate whom they're stopping and why. And so we will now have the evidence, the data that will help us, again, try to figure out trends, find out what's going on, because of the concern that there is racial and identity profiling that's occurring. And hopefully now we'll have some hard data to help us actually deal with this the right way.
And will the public have access to that data at a county level? They will?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you about another data point. Prison population in California, it peaked at 163,000 in 2006. The latest figures I saw was 112,300, which was just under 136% of capacity. That's important because the Supreme Court mandated that you get down to about 137.5% of capacity. What's allowed you to bring it down to this point? And is the state on trajectory for further reductions, or will that require new policies?
So I think the state's leaders finally decided that creating the largest prison population in the nation and having a country that has the largest prison population in the world isn't making us safer. And so at least in California, there are efforts now to try to no longer just institutionalize folks. As I said, I think sometimes what we're doing is we're just locking up our prejudices and our insecurities more than we're doing anything good about trying to protect ourselves. And I think what we're doing now is trying to give alternatives to folks who've committed a crime, but in this case, a lower level of crime, and so that we will no longer house them in state penitentiaries. Here's the rub, though. I remember when I first got out of law school, my first job was representing young people who were mentally ill, who were being locked up in adult mental facilities, and that's against the law. And because they didn't have income, they didn't have the capacity to fight for themselves to get out of these institutions. So as a legal services attorney, I would go in. That was during the age of what we call deinstitutionalization of folks who had mental health illness. We deinstitutionalized a whole lot of folks. And we said, let's let them exist in a community setting. What we did, unfortunately, was forgot to provide the resources in the communities to help these folks who were leaving the institutions. And we will rue the day that we try to deinstitutionalize our prisons with with the low-level offenders if we don't provide the resources to reintegrate, to rehabilitate, to offer them alternatives, because then there will be that vicious circle that we constantly see. We could, what's really scary, a young man who is about to be incarcerated in our juvenile facility, and for 1 year, we could let that young man go just not far from here to UCLA 8 times over 8 years, and it would cost less than locking that young man up for 1 year in juvenile prison. And so we should recognize that we're going to save the taxpayers in California a ton of money by no longer incarcerating low-level offenders, but if we forget the second part, which is the follow-through to provide the resources in the community, then we're setting ourselves up for failure.
I thought your first job was professional poker player. Was that undergraduate?
That continues. That just
no, but was that undergraduate? When was? No. There's actually a serious question in there, which is, and maybe you answered it a little bit in the previous answer. When you approach these issues, these criminal justice issues, what shapes your experience? Is it kind of your experience as a policymaker, or are there personal experiences further back that inform the way you approach these questions?
I think at the end of the day, if you want to take a look at anyone who's in a position of leadership, politics or otherwise, if you want to know where they're going to take you, just take a look at where they've come from. My parents were immigrants. My father got to about the 6th grade. I'm the first in my family to get to go to a university and get a 4-year college degree. I remember being pulled over once by police when I was growing up with my friends. Didn't ticket us or anything, but just pulled us over. And it was clear that he was just checking to find out if we might be menaces to society. He let me go. The officer was not uncordial or anything, but he had no basis to stop me. And so much of what I do, I think, is shaped by my experiences growing up and knowing that there are a whole bunch of folks like me, like my parents. My father's a retired construction worker. My mother's a retired clerical worker. And for me, if I'm doing a good job as Attorney General or as a leader, it's because I'm helping people who are today's construction worker and clerical worker who, in my parents' days, could buy a house, send their kids to college, and retire in dignity. And I think today it's a lot harder to make a construction worker and a clerical worker believe that that could be available to them. And so we need to fight for that so they can feel like their kids will get to do what they never got to do.
So in addition to all the state issues we've been talking about, a big part of your life now is spent fighting the Trump administration in court on a whole series. Roughly how many different lawsuits do you have underway now?
Let's see. We sort of lost track.
You've lost track.
It's, we've got about, it's more than a dozen.
More than a dozen. Go back to the 1990s. You did not have Republican attorneys general suing Bill Clinton, not many Democrats against George W. Bush, but it really started in large scale under President Obama when you saw the coalitions led by Texas suing on DACA, suing on the climate plan, suing on the ACA. Is this now, and now we're seeing it in reverse with Democrats, and for that matter, the Republicans weighing in often as well. For example, on the effort to force him to rescind or pressure him to rescind DACA by going to court. Is this now a permanent feature of the system where there's, in addition to the political conflict at the federal level, we're going to see states routinely now in court fighting an administration of the other party?
First, I see it differently from what I think Republican state attorneys general were doing under the Obama term of presidency. California has gone farther than any state when it comes to whether it's criminal justice reform, environmental protection, clean energy, treatment of immigrants, and it's worked. We've done enough to become not just the economic engine of the country, but we're now the 6th largest economy in the world, and if currency rates fluctuate a bit today, we'll surpass Great Britain and become number 5. And so why should we stop doing what's made us so successful? And so we're going to move forward, we're going to lean forward, and I essentially told the governor, if he did give me this chance to be AG, that I'd have his back in moving forward. So I'm not out looking to pick a fight with anyone, whether in DC or anywhere else, but we're ready for one because we're going to protect the things that we've done that have moved us ahead. And so when I sue the Trump administration for trying to eliminate in ways that are unlawful the DACA program for Dreamers, it's because we're protecting things that have made us very successful. When I sue the Trump administration because they don't want to do something as simple as move forward with energy efficient light bulbs, it's because we've gone through that and we're not interested in going backwards. So it's not that I'm looking for fights to pick, it's that I'm trying to protect the things that have made California the 6th largest economy in the world.
You and other states have had some victories, but at the end of the line on every one of these cases, they all end in the same place, with the Supreme Court with 5 Republican-appointed nominees. Justices, how concerned are you that ultimately a Republican-controlled Supreme Court means that you could be facing, all of the states resisting many of the things the Trump administration is doing, could be facing a dead end at the end?
I mean, you're talking to the son of immigrants. Optimism runs in my veins, and so we're going to win. It's just, it's going to happen. It doesn't come easy, but for
Anthony Kennedy is a Californian, right?
And he graduated from McClatchy High School in Sacramento the way I did, so maybe we can have a conversation. No, at the end of the day, it's not going to be because of one person or one Supreme Court. This is where we're heading. What California is doing, the rest of the nation will do. They're just a little bit behind. Right now there's an election in Virginia going on right now that's being driven by that, lock them up, lock up my prejudices. So the Republicans are attacking the Democratic gubernatorial candidate because Democrats have said that if you served your time in prison, you should be able to vote. And now they're turning that into some boogeyman. Republicans are attacking Democrats because we're trying to protect immigrant families from being separated, and they're saying that that's bad because we're now letting murderers and rapists roam our streets. It's that boogeyman, and unfortunately it often works, as we saw in California a generation ago with Prop 187, which was as anti-immigrant a measure as you could have. And as we saw with Michael Dukakis in the 1988 presidential elections with the Willie Horton ad. So
let's talk about Virginia for 1 minute and then turn it back to California, because the other, and probably the one that they put the most money on, has been attacking the Republican nominee, Ed Gillespie, who worked in the Bush White House, worked on comprehensive immigration reform, has moved in a very Trump-like direction, and he's focused a lot of money attacking the Democrats for supposedly supporting sanctuary cities. There are no sanctuary cities in Virginia. The governor vetoed a bill that would have banned them kind of preemptively. The Democrat has really been kind of on his back heels over this, and last week said he would sign a bill to ban sanctuary cities, unlike the current governor. They clearly have had trouble dealing with this issue. This is a state where obviously the policy has gone very far in the other direction, a sanctuary state, quote unquote. What would be your message to Democrats in other states who may be looking at a reprise of the Gillespie tactics in 2018? What is the case that can be made for these kinds of policies?
I mean, don't be afraid. I mean, you just gotta be who you are. As I said,
what's the case for why you are safer if a community limits its cooperation with federal immigration enforcement? Is there a case that can be made?
Cities that are moving to protect their populations and their law enforcement authorities or police forces from intrusion by the federal government telling them how to do their job, are protecting the ability of public safety to move forward. Because what we're saying is we want to keep, it's not a matter of sanctuary cities, it's a matter of safe cities. And you can't have safe cities if there's a segment of the population that won't report crime if they're victims, won't report crime if they're witnesses, because they're too afraid to encounter anyone in law enforcement because they fear that they'll be deported in the process of trying to be a good Samaritan. And so we have in California said we want to have safe cities. And in order to do that, we can't have the federal government trying to commandeer our state and its local law enforcement authorities and telling them, you must do immigration enforcement, a federal activity for us. And we're going to get out there and fight against that. That's why I sued the Trump administration on that, because they don't have the right to tell us under the 10th Amendment how to do our business. And so we'll do public safety our way. We'll let them be in charge of their deportation force.
We'll bring in the audience real quick, but real quick, you have to write guidelines on the, you not only have to deal above on the sanctuary state legislation, you also deal with the counties and with local law enforcement, some of which, especially in agricultural areas, have been less than enthusiastic about the bill. How concerned are you, your office is the one that monitors compliance, how concerned are you about ensuring compliance?
I think most of the sheriffs and police chiefs understand that they want to have safety. And to have safety, their officers, their deputies have to be able to interact with all the community. And we've gone through this experience, as I said before, with Prop 187. We're way beyond that. And be unafraid. As the undocumented dreamers always say, undocumented and unafraid, I think that's exactly what the way Americans should be, unafraid to just tackle this straight on.
Let's bring in the audience real quick. If we have a question somewhere, and then we have a question right there. Oop. There it was, yeah. Second row.
Good morning and thank you. We talked a little about, since this is a little about women and girls, what reforms do you think we should probably be thinking about putting in place as it relates to sexual harassment? There's been a lot of articles recently about what's going on in the Capitol and so forth, so I'd just like to hear your point of view. Thank you.
Yeah, probably the most important thing is to make a young woman believe that if she reports, action will be taken, because if none is taken, then all it is you become the victim twice. You're attacked by some predator, and then you're attacked by others for having claimed something when nothing is proved up. And so I think the most important thing we can do is really go out there and be aggressive in trying to make sure that if you report, we'll take aggressive action to make sure there's follow through.
Let's do one more question.
Hi, Attorney General Becerra. My name is Jyoti Nanda. I run a youth and justice clinic at UCLA School of Law. I appreciate you're researching the Stockton Unified School Police Department investigation, and wondered, since we were talking this morning about young girls and the impact of school police on their performance in school and their safety and their trauma, if the AG's office would be a leader again in taking a strong stance against perhaps removing school police officers from the school setting.
I have lots of jurisdiction, but I don't have jurisdiction to decide how a school district conducts its business. I do have jurisdiction to go in and make sure that they're following the law. And so in the case of Stockton, where we think they may be violating the law in the process of trying to keep the peace, we have the right to go in and do the pattern and practice investigation. What I can tell you is this: I think it is important to make sure that you don't resort to the criminal justice system to deal with issues in a classroom that should be resolved in other ways, because there's something driving that young person to act in a certain way, and it's unfortunate. As I said, we're so afraid to invest the money it takes because we think we're going to fail with this young person. We don't realize how much we would save by trying and trying and trying, because as I just said to you, and you would know this because of your UCLA Law School, we could pay for that young man or young woman to go to UCLA undergrad, graduate, then go to UCLA Law School, and still save money than if we just allowed them to be in that youth prison for 1 year. Just crazy.
We have to surrender the stage, but let me ask, I think a lot of people here are wondering, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, do you believe that Congress, in the end, will be able to find a solution for the DACA kids? And if not, what happens? Will the administration begin large-scale deportation?
I think that the DACA dreamers are here to stay. One way or the other, as they said, they are unafraid. I don't believe this country will kick them out. I have less faith in Congress, even though I served there for 24 years. But I do believe that we're going to find a solution for that, whether it's through the litigation that we're engaged in to protect them, or it's through Congress. One way or the other, I think a lot of us are going to stand with the Dreamers to say they're here to stay. This is their home.
Join me in thanking Attorney General Javier Becerra. Yeah, we leave the mics.
And now, Love Letters, a video by Google.
We're so lucky to spend Mother's Day together, but there are hundreds of thousands of kids whose moms are incarcerated this Mother's Day.
So we wanted some kids to share letters that they wrote it to their moms. Dear Mom, hi Mom, I miss you very much.
I know I don't write you a lot, but this letter right here is actually pretty special.
Your second Mother's Day away, I took to Facebook and posted, I love my mother.
But most of all, I miss your love. I miss your hugs.
Every Mother's Day, I listen to all of our favorite songs.
I think about you all the time. At night, when I'm getting ready to go to bed, it makes me think of the most amazing mom that I have. I miss playing with you and sleeping with you at night.
I miss your smile, and I miss how you always used to say funny things on Facebook and post that. I miss how you used to I can't do it.
I've been having some personality issues. By that I mean my sexuality, and I wish you weren't in prison so you could be here to help me with it.
School is kind of good, but fighting in school is difficult.
Recently, I was inducted for the National Honor Society at my school.
Something good that's happened to me recently is that I went roller skating.
Mom, I love riding bikes because I just love riding them.
Dear Mom, I will always love you no matter what happened.
And I can't wait to see you.
From your firstborn, Tyshante. Happy Mother's Day.
I love you, Mom. Sincerely, Giovanna. Happy Mother's Day!
Love, Sanaya, your favorite daughter.
Happy Mother's Day.
Click on the link below to see more love letters to moms.
For a session produced by our underwriter, please welcome Google's Senior Counsel on Civil and Human Rights, Malika Sada Sar.
Hey everyone, it's really an honor to be with you today, and I'm so thankful to the Atlantic for this partnership and this beautiful event that we have been able to do. Almost 2 years ago, Brian Stevenson came to Google, and he challenged us as a company to bear witness, to be proximate to the human costs of mass incarceration. And we have taken him up on that challenge. Over the last 2 years, we have thought through how do we use our different platforms to be able to disrupt the human costs of mass incarceration. So one example of that is love letters. How do we use the platform of YouTube to be able to show what it means to incarcerate a mother or father? But we've gone beyond that. We just finished a documentary on Rikers. And the documentary is in honor of Kalief Browder's mother, Benita Browder. And it is a powerful 12-minute documentary that gives voice to those who have been impacted by Rikers, either because they were put behind bars there or their children were. And I urge you to see it. We have it in the back of the room so that you might be able to have a chance today to see what we've created through the Rikers short doc. We are also spending this year doing convenings in different Google campuses to be able to talk about what we mean when we say justice reform, and what are the areas of justice reform that are required of us. And then finally, I want to be able to make this clear that we have also looked at our own policy at Google. And so in March of 2016, Google formally banned the box for all full-time employees. I also want to make clear that this is the community that I come out of. That before I was at Google, I was a human rights attorney focused on the issue of gender-based violence and justice reform and racial justice. And I spent years going to prisons and talking to women who were incarcerated about how when they were pregnant and behind bars and ready to give birth, they were shackled. Their experience of being shackled and being in that moment, that vulnerable, painful moment of labor and then delivery of their child in shackles. I documented the stories of mothers who, during transport from one jail to a prison, at 7 months pregnant, had a belly shackle over her. I documented stories of mothers who talked about how they were shackled, gave birth, and as soon as that baby was put to their arms, the baby was removed from them, because that's what happens in too many of our jails and prisons. And I've also had the honor and the privilege of being able to work with fierce women like Ashay Jackson and Monique Morris, and understand the way that our girls are being criminalized. We talk about the school-to-prison pipeline, but there's also something that we've documented, the sexual abuse-to-prison pipeline, which is really the girl's story, right? I've met so many girls who were locked up because they were victims of sexual violence. Up to 80% of the girls in our state detention centers are victims of violence, of sexual violence. We lock girls up for running away, but most often they're running from abuse. So we tell women who are abused to run, but when our girls run from abuse, we lock them up on the status offense of running away. And I think the most egregious example of the way that we criminalize our girls for sexual violence is what happens when you're trafficked. And so many of you in this room know that girls in Compton, girls all over this country are bought and sold. And when they are, too often, the response is criminalization, that they are locked up for prostitution even though none of them are of the age to legally consent. And so that sexual abuse to prison pipeline that is our girls' story, and that way that we see girls, and especially girls of color, too often denied the status of victim of violence or the status of child. Those lived experiences, those stories of our mothers, of our daughters who are impacted by mass incarceration, those are the stories that we are committed to telling through our platforms at Google. And as a company, we are committed to being able to say that this conversation around justice reform is a conversation that we want to be part of, and that these platforms and this opportunity that we have to educate and to share stories and realities and lived experiences so that we can scale the prison walls. It is our opportunity and responsibility, and we are so deeply honored to be part of this work with all of you and to be able to do this event with The Atlantic. Thank you. I also want to let you know that in the back of the room, we have this cardboard. Defining Justice is this opportunity that we have here as part of Defining Justice to show you VR content that we are creating on solitary confinement. So this is a project that we did with The Guardian, that it's a full audio-visual immersion of solitary confinement. I warn you that it can be triggering, so please know that. We have enough of the cardboard for everybody here. This is an opportunity for those who don't know the experience to be able to understand viscerally for 3 or 4 minutes what does it mean to be in solitary. We also have content that we've created through Riker's documentary that we have back there, as well as content that we've created that looks at all of the work that we've been doing in the last 2 years around justice reform and the work that we've done with EJI on lynching and the criminal justice system and the analysis of the connections between the two. So I thank you. I really hope that you all check that out. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, my name is Shirley Garcia and I'm 22 years old. I'm here representing Spirit Awakening. I'm a peer mentor for them. I bring this up because I just wanted to say growing up, being incarcerated and in the schools, I came across many organizations. And there is very few organizations that can actually reach out to the children and make a change because of the circumstances we are going through at the time. And I just wanted to say that if you are here representing an organization, please don't stop because you are the moving force and you are molding us into better citizens and better people. So I just wanted to say that. And I'm going to be reading a piece called Orange Jumpsuit. When I left institution, it took me a long time to actually feel free once again. When I stepped out of those gates, I no longer knew who I was. I was still imprisoned in my mind. I was replaying my past for a long time, feeling sorry for myself and afraid to take on life again. My mind was trapped. Was I that girl in an orange jumpsuit and chains wrapped around my ankles, waist, and wrists? Or was I that girl who had dreams, goals, and love in her heart? Or was I now just a product of society, just another number, just another statistic, just another failure? A person who can no longer feel emotion, regret, or compassion? What would now define me? They say we are cold and don't calculate our moves correctly, but we know survival. And there is no rules. It is a way of life. It's a way to maintain. It's just another day. How do we explain this to them who have never gone one night to sleep hungry, who've never seen their own people suffer, who've never made a heartless decision a day in their perfect lives, who've never lost friends and no longer feel pain or are surprised. Our hearts beat no more. Our hearts feel no more love, and our veins are full of hate. We are searching for that day where we can break away and be human once again. Every day I wake up and I look at myself in the mirror and I make a choice to be better. I choose to move forward and I choose to leave it all behind. And I walk away. I choose to be free. I am a master of self-control because I was able to be chained down, yet every second was eating away at me, and I made it. I chose to be free. I know it can be. Thank you.
For a conversation on staying connected through art, please welcome Mikkel West, a celebrity fashion stylist, and John Rodriguez, a writer and member of Pops the Club, a writing and support group for students who have been touched by incarceration. The Atlantic's Allison Stewart is back to lead the conversation.
Yes, you are a stylist. You look fabulous. That's very obvious.
Thank you.
Yes, I read in an interview you did, someone was interviewing you about your career, Mikkel, and you said, when I was a little girl, I fell in love with fashion. I played dress up in my mother's closet. What did you like to put on? What did you love about your mother's wardrobe and her style?
My mother's wardrobe was very, I would say, clean and sophisticated, like a Claire Huxtable type of vibe. And I would mostly play in like her handbags and her nightgowns. And I would just go to like a imaginary land.
And that was when you were very, very young.
Yes.
Right? Because your mother was arrested when you were 10 years old.
Correct.
What do you remember about that day and the weeks that followed? Did you understand what had happened?
Actually, I did understand what happened. I just didn't allow my family to know that I understood what happened because I don't think that they were strong enough to grasp that conversation with a 10-year-old. So my mom, she took me to school, and then she just didn't pick me up. And then when some not strangers, but random people picked me up, and my mom was always there for me, so I knew something was up within that situation. And then when I got home, the whole house had been ransacked, and my grandmother and her sisters were there alongside my aunt, and I asked, what's going on with the house? Why does it look like this? And then everyone had looked like someone had passed away. And my grandmother said, well, we've been cleaning. And I'm like, Grandma, when you clean, things get better. This is not cleaning.
You're smart.
So I just left them at the table at that point because I knew that something had happened and they didn't want to talk. So I ran upstairs and I was like, let me find my mom's purse. And I found it, and it was empty, and it just had like a few quarters in the bottom. And at that point, that's when I realized that I was chosen to lead and set an example for children with incarcerated parents.
Your mother has a very heavy sentence, a very harsh sentence, 2 life sentences plus 50, all surrounding a drug charge, which also involved a murder. And the person who testified against her, who committed the murder, didn't do any time, is that right?
That's correct. He received full immunity, and then my mom went to prison for drug conspiracy.
One of the things that's amazing about your story with your mom is your mother did not let proximity get in the way of parenting. She was connected to you throughout your whole life. In fact, there was one psychologist at Danbury facility that said that she'd never seen a bond like the one between you and your mom. That it was one for the books, that's how she put it. What did you do that allowed you to stay so close to your mom? What were some of the workarounds so that she could be really involved and invested in you?
Well, when a person goes to prison, the family members go as well. It's just a different type of level. obviously they're not behind bars, but they're still dealing with the same situations. Even with going to visit, they're treated a certain way. So instead of being a statistic and getting caught up in like, oh, my life and why did this happen, we still have to keep going. Like my mom isn't dead, I'm not dead, so we have to live. And my mom, we would read books together, do fashion things together. My mom helps put inspiration boards together. She's typed every resume that has gotten me every job that I've ever had. And we just kept our bond because my mom was my best friend, and she still is. So we didn't want to let the prison situation separate us, even though we were separated. So it's just about continuing the relationship and building and being there for your kid and for the child being there for their mom.
We're there for each other.
Or their parent.
John, I want to bring you in the conversation. When did Governor Brown commute your sentence?
My sentence got commuted in the middle of August.
Of this year?
Of this year.
What's your transition been like?
It's everything that I used to look forward to, with all the ups and all the downs. Because as much as I would like to say that, and I do really mean this, that every single moment is like a blessing to me. Like, I can go to a subway station and just be fascinated at the way people are all on their phones, they're talking, they're just navigating the world and not really understanding where they are and the chance they have. But on the other end, too, it's very difficult.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
One of the ways that you express yourself beautifully is through writing, and you've been that way your whole life. I want to walk back to your high school years. You've described to us that, us meaning the Atlantic folks backstage, that you were living kind of a double life in high school, that you were learning to be this great writer, but you were out in the streets in the other half of your life. Mm-hmm. What was it like to live those two kind of lives, and why was that happening for you?
It was difficult. One thing that I always really felt since growing up was that prison was meant for me. And this idea came because family members that I had were in prison, friends I had that I grew up with were in prison. And it's messed up to say, I remember my mom telling me since I was a little kid, you're gonna go 2 places, dead or in jail. And so even though deep down I wanted to like prove her wrong, something about me just like lashed out and, okay, I could be a tough guy. I could do all these things that you say I'm not capable of. And so the double life was that once I went to school and I found a teacher named Dennis. Yeah, he's awesome. The double life started because I turned in an essay and he pulled me over after class and then he told me, that was a great piece of writing. You're a wonderful writer. And that was the very first time a teacher had ever told me I was good at doing anything.
Did you believe him?
I believed him without a doubt.
Good for you.
Not to sound all cocky or anything, but...
But you knew you were a writer inside. You knew.
Yeah.
And now someone else was bringing it out in you.
Mm-hmm.
I know when you were incarcerated, you and Dennis remained very close.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how you maintained that closeness, kind of the same question I was asking of Mikkel. How did you retain that closeness?
Through letter correspondence. It's kind of an archaic way of corresponding, but I feel it's one of the better ways of doing it because to me, you can't hide anything in writing. So it started off with him writing letters about every week. And at first, I wouldn't respond all the time because I was, why does this white guy keep writing to me, right? And in the back of my head, whether I really thought about this or not, I really thought there was something in it for him. Because everybody that I grew up around, they don't just care, they don't lend you a hand just for any reason. They want something back. And finally, after months and months, I just went in with all my chips, and I noticed that I didn't want to go all in and really grasp this relationship because there was a chance of me getting hurt. But it was worth it. even if it did happen.
When you were first incarcerated and you had the opportunity to write, what did you want to write about? Did you want to write about the prison experience, or did you want to use it as a chance to go in your imagination and go somewhere else?
I did not want to write about prison. For me, prison was too stereotypical. Most of the stories that came out of there were the same stuff you see on TV, you read in books. What I kept on writing about without wanting to was about my childhood. Every single time, just like about the first 15, 20 pieces of writing were about me and my relationship with my mother. Mm. And what it did for me, I didn't know it at the time, was that I kept on revisiting these places, and every time I went back, I seen something different, something I didn't catch. And by the end of it, I was able to let it go and just feel good about me.
I want to bring you back into the conversation, Mikhail. Your mom has mastered, she's really invested in social media, which I find really interesting because it's worked for you and you're using it to work for her. Tell everyone a little bit about how your mom has helped you with your career by figuring out how to get your message out about you through social media.
My page went, my Instagram page at Mikhail West went
Good
viral.
Girl. Good girl.
Last year, there was a story done on my mom by the Humans in New York, and there were many people that told their story that were in prison, but my mom didn't really speak on her story. She just kind of told everyone to go look at Mikhail's page, follow Mikhail, and my kid, she's cool, she's good. And like 40,000 people came onto my page from all over the world, and they were like, we're here for you, you're amazing. And at that point, I never felt lonely anymore. Like, I was like, wow, all of these people are here supporting me, and it made the stakes go higher. Like, now I really can't give up because these people are all watching. So my mom was able to do that for me. She made my page go viral, and we were able to put our story out and get the word out behind her directing everyone to my Instagram.
And you learned the lesson so that you could, in turn, use social media to try to help your mom and potentially get her out of prison. Explain the hashtag that you developed.
I developed the hashtag Free Michelle West. And it's, to me, a household hashtag. Everyone knows about it, or they're curious about it. And it's just pretty much in black and white, Free Michelle West. And it's opened up a lot of doors. I was able to go to the White House and come here and speak to Google and do a lot of things and just continue advocating and helping kids to understand that if your parents go to prison, that's not the end of the world, that you can just keep working and on your goals and make something of yourself.
That's interesting. This is a little bit off topic, but I thought about you when I was researching. And you know, Sesame Street has introduced a character that has a parent in jail. And I thought about, wow, what if that had been around when you were little?
When I was like, why wasn't this around when I was little? I'm just happy it's here now, because it's been a topic that people kind of like to not talk about because it's uncomfortable. Yeah. But we have to have these uncomfortable situations to bring awareness to these situations. If we keep sweeping them under the rug, no one will be aware. So I'm happy that kids can say, like, hey, I have a parent in prison.
And it brings awareness to kids whose parents aren't in prison to the situation as well. It doesn't have to be siloed just to kids who have parents who are incarcerated. John, you when you went to prison, I've interviewed a bunch of different artists from prison, and I always ask this: are you an artist who went to prison, or did prison make you an artist? Were you a writer in prison, or were you a prisoner who learned to write?
I think it may go both ways. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that, because like in prison, there's everything going on around you. There's this different world, but at the end of the day, it is a world and you are living in it. And when I wrote, it was my time to get away from all of everything around me. And so the experiences that I did have in there, they did impact me as a writer. Mm-hmm. I no longer, actually found like different pockets in prison where there are good people, there are good communities, there are people that are willing to put their hearts out into a certain program, anything. And that's when I started writing about that, because this was something that was hidden to me. I didn't think it really existed. But once you find it, you're going to find good people in any place that you're in.
Well, we've talked about your writing a lot, so we need to hear some of your writing.
Okay.
You've got a poem. Tell us about this poem and what prompted you to write this.
This poem I wrote after a visitation. And I kind of went back to the cell and reflected on it and how I felt and how possibly those I love feel also. So this is called Ordinary Weekend, and it's in a Pops anthology called Cracked Mask. As I sit there and dwell, my head spins while trying to balance the worlds of love and hurt. She grabs my hands, and I don't know if she sees that they're tattered and beat, but not physically. I wonder if they look at me and feel disgust for a fool covered in concrete. They wait in long lines and drive down miles of open road to see if I will respond and in a way learn to love again and not be afraid to have friends and not scared to show my feelings, but understand that my life has meaning. Besides simmering in a pool of iron where boots clank and the years wave goodbye. For these few seconds, I have it under control. A world is at ease. My hands sweat with remorse and learn to ignore the hate and negativity that has built inside me. But the speaker announces that visiting is over. I give a hug that I will miss and spin away from those who make me feel like I'm worth living. They smile, but I know it hurts them as much as it does me. A feeling of gain and loss, a true oxymoron. Out they go, back to their iron-touched lives, and I pass through the doorway that leads to negativity.
That is beautiful, first of all.
Thank you.
You were very worried about inviting Dennis and his wife into your life. This idea of like, you were now engaged in a relationship with somebody behind bars. Why were you so worried about them?
I was so worried because I don't think I've ever been so emotionally invested in a relationship. And the few times that I have, they didn't turn out well. Mm-hmm. And so with them, I really started like questioning myself. Why do I feel like this is, I never really knew my dad, but why do I feel like this is my dad and Amy's my mom when I have a mother? I felt kind of like that's a sense of betrayal to them, but this is just a different type of love that I'm experiencing. It's something that's really genuine and it's not handed down to you. I chose to be loved by them.
And they chose you.
Yeah.
Before we go, Mikel, tell everyone what the status is with your mom and what you plan to do going forward.
Well, the fight continues. The status is where we left off, the White House. I was invited to the White House. There was a conversation about clemency for justice. And it was a lot of false hope because I honestly was under the impression that my mom would come home. I thought that I was to the finish line. And then they sent us on our way, and a few months went by, and now President Obama's out of office, and my mom is still sitting there. So that's when I realized I'm not to the finish line. I'm halfway there. So I'm going to continue advocating and fighting for my mother. I get a little emotional at times. But even once I die, I'll fight for my mom in the afterlife. I'll continue to fight. Thank you.
And it's clear your mom fights for you and Dennis Amy fought for you. What's that hashtag again before we go?
Free Michelle West.
All right,
and you can follow the story at my Instagram.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Now joining Allison on stage, please welcome Ingrid Archie, Proposition 47 Specialist at a New Way of Life Reentry Project, Anna DeVere Smith, actress and producer, Janet Soto, a Senior Navigator and Case Manager at Homeboy Industries, and Sabra Williams, actress and co-founder of the Actors Gang Prison Project.
Oh, thank you, ladies, so much. And I want to start with you and your latest work, Notes from the Field, latest stage work, I should say. You went across the country, you interviewed around 250 different people, all with different involvements in and around and related to the criminal justice system. What were you listening for during those interviews?
Well, the play is called Notes from the Field, and Allison has such a complicated question. What was I listening for? First of all, I was trying to understand what we call the school-to-prison pipeline. What is it? So that's the first level of just like, what is it? So I went to Stockton, which at the time was bankrupt and homicide-ridden, and then I went further north to the Yurok tribe. Native Americans tend to be left out of these discussions. And then I went to Philly, and then I went to my hometown, serendipitously ending up there right after the riot, Baltimore. And then we went around South Carolina, up and down what's called the Corridor of Shame, just what it sounds like, disastrous schools and poverty. Then on another level, what I'm looking for whenever I do an interview, and I've interviewed thousands and thousands of people now, on a larger project called On the Road, A Search for American Character, is I'm looking for people to start to sing to me. And what I find is that when people are in distress, or if something has been taken away from them, they become incredible singers of their own experience. And that's one of the reasons that I've always been interested in catastrophe. As you know, I have 2 plays about riots. Mm-hmm. And to me, the people that I have met inside the criminal justice system, in my case, I'm very interested in young people, how they end up in the criminal justice system. And as we know, Black, brown, and Native American children are disciplined more harshly than their middle-class counterparts, and a certain number of suspensions at a certain age pretty much predicts that they're going to be in this system and it'll be very difficult to get out. And so in the course of these 250 interviews, I've met many, many singers about that experience. And to me, what makes a person who's in a catastrophic circumstance a particularly good metaphoric singer is that they are trying to make sense out of what happened to them and to restore their dignity. So to me, to have an opportunity to talk to a person who's incarcerated, or a person who's working very hard to keep children from being incarcerated, or anyone who's suffered loss, if they're willing to talk to me, is that what happens in the course of that interview is a very creative moment that I can then, with their blessing and with a signed release, put on stage. So Notes from the Field is Notes from the Field. In Notes from the Field, I play 19 people in and around this crisis.
The producer, when you came out with the signing the release, the artist and the producer snuck in.
Well, I anticipate that question.
In many of the reviews for this, and you can see some of the clips on YouTube, the New Yorker...
I don't know how they got there. That's highly illegal, but you're welcome.
They're so great. The reviewer from the New Yorker made a notice of that it's not a heavily costumed event. It's all about your voice. And we're talking a lot about voice and giving voice. Can you talk a little bit as an artist how you go about creating and finding the actual timbre and tone and why that's important to telling the story?
Well, again, Allison, that's many questions, but let me clarify one thing. I don't give anybody voice. The 2 of you saw those young people who I just slipped in the back, those 2 gorgeous young people, the writer and the fashion icon. don't you think they have a voice of their own? If I had the privilege of repeating anything they say, it would be a gift to me. They're giving me voice. So I don't give anybody voice. I'm just lucky. What I say is I'm just looking for the people who would scream their story from a mountaintop, and I happen to be walking by. I think of all them as sort of opera singers, and I come away with this recording. What I'm listening for, frankly, is for an incomplete sentence. I'm looking for sentences not to be successful. Because that's what imagination is. You know, those of us who had to make our way through to 6th grade, you know, you learn that a sentence goes all the way across the page. Now, I've been teaching, I say I teach the fancy people, now NYU, previously Stanford and USC. They all speak, you know, they all can go all the way across the page. Well, that's not dramatic. That looks nice in a book, looks nice in a novel, but that's not where a person lives. A person lives in where they break through the sentence. So I think of a sentence the way I think of a prison sentence. So I'm always looking for that person who's going to break through that structure and do something original. That's what I'm listening for.
So I want to bring you into the conversation. The work you do in prisons with women within the arts. Something I'm curious about. Well, let me not get ahead of myself. First of all, explain to folks how you use the commedia dell'arte, that sort of classic form, to help prisoners, these women, find themselves, explore their issues, and why did you choose something so classic like that?
Okay, well, let me start by kind of echoing what Anna says. I never speak on behalf of people who are incarcerated. That would be like a white guy speaking on my behalf. I don't do it. I speak on behalf of artists, and especially artists who work in this space. So I'm an actor, and I'm a member of the Actors Gang, a theatre company just down the road here in Culver City. And the style of theatre that we do is an ancient style of Italian theatre that we've bastardized, called commedia dell'arte. And it's highly physical and emotional, and we wear masks. So it turned out, I mean, I'm an actor doing that work, and I was amazed by how profoundly I felt I was changing by doing the work. And I'd worked in the UK, just doing Shakespeare plays in prison, completely different. And because it was having such a profound effect on me, and because I was an immigrant here and heard the horrific statistics 15 years ago about incarceration in this country, you know, I'm a person of action. I'm an actor. I take action. So I was like, well, let me go to Tim Robbins, our artistic director, and see if he likes this idea of doing this in prison. So literally I was like, hey, do you like this idea? And he was like, go ahead, let's make something happen. And so I literally Googled prisons in California and was like, oh, Pelican Bay, that sounds pretty. And realized not so pretty. So we started almost 12 years ago just trying, it's a process-oriented program. So literally just trying to do workshop with them, improvising in these characters. And what we quickly realized is that the safe space of the mask gave people an opportunity to transform the results of their trauma, to heal their trauma in a safe space together. We have Northerners, Southerners, white supremacists, I mean, you name the gangs, they're in the room together. They are having an opportunity, often for the first time, to have a different emotional experience. And I don't know if people know, but in prison, the only two emotions that are acceptable are anger or numbness. So now they get to be happy, angry, sad, and afraid, and it gives them an opportunity to respond in a different way to life and to what they're experiencing. And I should say we work with girls as well as women.
I'm curious because, you know, being an artist is about being vulnerable, and that's a difficult, prison's a difficult place to be vulnerable. So how do you help them when you have to leave and the play is over to go back to the life that they're living?
Well, we don't put on plays. We're not trying to make actors. I don't think any of people have become actors. They're just doing workshop. So I guess I would answer that with a question. Who here has a daughter? Okay, so if your daughter came to you and said she'd been raped or abused or had violence inflicted on her, how would you deal with the outcomes, the traumatic outcomes of that? You can just shout out. I'm asking a real question. How? Love. What else? anger, fear, whatever. Talking, get help, therapy. We don't do that in America. If they're brown or black or poor, we punish them and we incarcerate them for their trauma. That is what's happening. And so I think we need to wake up to that fact. In all the years we've been working, particularly with girls, I've seen 2 white girls incarcerated. Everyone is black, brown, indigenous, and poor in there. And so we come into a space where there's incredible trauma and incredible emotional damage. And what we do is we bring the tools of theater, the tools of the commedia dell'arte, to give them an opportunity to find their voice. Because as Ava DuVernay just said, all we have is our voice. Well, it's no coincidence that these people have had their voices taken away, silenced and invisible. Their voices are considered dangerous. So we teach them the tools of TED Talks in our juvenile facilities so they can share their stories. And we give them tools that they can play like children. Most people who are incarcerated have never had a childhood. So they missed that emotional development. So they get a very speeded up version of that. And I still hear, 7, 8, 9, 10 years later, people will still call me and say, hey, I was with my boss, he was acting like an idiot, and I just wanted to yell at him. And, this is somebody who was a returned citizen. And they said, I stopped, I took a breath, I asked myself, where am I right now? I used the tools, still 7 years later, not an actor, and took a different action. So I think that because when people are incarcerated doing the work, they see the culture change. We disrupt the system through the arts, which is why the arts should not be last in and first out. And it's cheaper, by the way. And so they can take that with them when they leave, and they do.
So even though they left the workshop, it's whatever they've experienced is still with them.
They have the tools to look at their lives, take responsibility, and as do I, not just them, I do it too, and to make a different emotional choice. And we do now have re-entry programs as well to give them an off-ramp when they're returning.
I want to bring in Ingrid and Janet into the conversation. You both do advocacy work. You've both been involved in the system, had difficulties with it, experienced a lot of the things that we've all talked about this morning. Ingrid, when you see, one of the things we're going to talk about is portrayals and perceptions of women who've been incarcerated in the media and in entertainment. When you see those portrayals, what's the thing that is missing? What is the point that people just are not getting?
Everything.
You're my favorite person today for that answer. Ingrid, would you hold your mic up so people can hear you?
Okay.
Thank you.
So I believe it's everything because they don't see when a woman is arrested or split apart from her child at the time of arrest. The child goes to DCFS, the woman goes to prison. They don't see the woman being shackled to go fight for her children. They don't see the hatred that's being thrown at her by society or by the judge or even by the person that's representing her to take this time because you deserve to go to jail. You're supposed to be represented by a public defender. We call them public pretenders because there's no way that you're supposed to defend me, but you're telling me to take time because I deserve it, instead of looking at where I came from. Women who go to jail are looked at as the worst thing possible, but in fact, we're caregivers that come from homes that we're the predominant caregiver after the other person is taken out and given a whole bunch of time. We're women, we're amazing, we're fighters, and once that's taken out of a home and is broken apart, then, society gets to say, oh, well, you're this, you're that, and you're this, but you never look at the backstory of that woman, how she was probably raped, how she was probably led a life that, she didn't want to lead, that she didn't have no resources or anything like that. So they don't tell any of those stories on TV. They want you to know that, oh yeah, I'm just a woman who's all hard and great and wonderful, and then I get out and I go home, when in fact, women come home and they land on nothing.
Janet, same question for you. What do you see that is not portrayed accurately or you think is missing in portrayals of women in the media?
I mean, I can't say it better than Ingrid. I totally agree with what she just said. I also experienced the same results of it. I mean, being in front of the judge, he's not going to see your background as far as you've been mistreated, like Ingrid mentioned, you know, if you've been abused or raped, any of that got you or lead you to the actions that you took. And not only that, your family's been ripped apart, you know, and the difficult part of it, like from my own experience, what it was, I actually lost full custody in the instant going to prison because of my charges. I didn't even have a say-so or where my kids could go. I didn't even have that chance or opportunity to say anything or to go to court at that, you know. So, you know, I get released and I don't even have that second chance. I try to, you know, get the second chance for my kids. My kids were already adopted. So to this day, I haven't even got the opportunity to be reunited with my kids. So it's hard.
Can I quickly mention something? I want to give a shout out to a woman named Michelle Jones, who is now a doctoral student at New York University. And many of you may have read an article in the New York Times in September about how from the Indiana State Prison, she was able to make her way through to a master's degree. Extraordinary research, was accepted by Harvard, NYU, Berkeley, and a couple of other universities. And Harvard's history department accepted her, and then the administration rescinded the invitation to come to Harvard. I'm very proud to say that we have her at NYU. I've welcomed her, and we are producing one of her plays.
Oh, fabulous.
A play written by she and another woman who is still inside. But I want to say that one of the things, as I listen to the two of you talk, is a question for us, which is how much punishment is enough? Where is forgiveness? Where do we believe that people have done their time?
Ingrid, based on your personal experience and your professional experience working as an advocate, what are you trying to do day to day to make things better?
Ooh, is that a trick question? So every day I just think about laying in that bed, thinking about what it would be to be reunited with my kids, what it would be to have a house that I could afford, have a job that I could be able to afford to pay the bills, to have the house, to be able to take care of my kids and not have to do the things that I was doing to end up back into incarceration. And that's a lot of our stories of us who are incarcerated. So I think about that and I try to advocate, you know, on behalf of women like myself who want to come home, who want to do the right thing. We have a group called Women Organizing for Justice and Opportunity, where we are training women, you know, to understand the whole process of the Department of Children and Family Services and how to be able to link the resources that they need while inside trying to fight for their kids, so that when they come home, they have the opportunity to be able to go to court or visit these court dates or understand the system that, you know, is basically used to funnel kids from one pipeline to another that ultimately leads to prison. We want to stop that. And we're trying to do that in our neighborhoods with our own people, with our own faces. So that's one of the things that, you know, I do every day, is just to advocate and be there and tell the truth. I don't lie about anything. I don't care how you feel. I don't care of, you know, if my situation is not enough for you to take. My situation wasn't enough for me to take at the time. So I make sure that I uplift my voice and I uplift others, and I let people know that the struggle is real. And women who are coming home need to be reunited with their families, their children. We need to have a fighting chance to be able to reunify with those relationships with our kids, and we need the resources. And the fact that nobody talks about it is really sad.
Janet, can you tell us a little bit about the work you do with Homeboy Industries and what the goals are?
Yes, so at Homeboy Industry, I'm a navigator, and a navigator is pretty much based on, I was a trainee at one point. I came in through the program. I did 18 months. I worked on myself, and when I say work on myself, it's really like tense work, working with therapists, really getting into the mental stage of like, why did I keep on doing the things I kept on doing and letting on to prison and going back to the neighborhood, pretty much that cycle that keeps on going. So with that, also learning skills. So, and then I graduated and I became a navigator. And what I do, it's pretty much walk with the trainee as they come in, newcomers, and I'm able to raise that mirror and be able to tell them, like, they could do it, give them that hope, you know, and be that hope for them, you know, and continue having those conversations and being available for them, which is important because some of people don't have family, you know, we are all they have. So it's important that, you know, if we say we're going to be there, we're there for them. You know, being consistent, that's really important. Right now, I'm currently doing acting case management, and I see a lot of what Ingrid just touched upon, especially women in color that come back to society and get their kids, but then there's no housing. So they're struggling with housing. You know, that's another thing too that I wanted to bring up, that we struggle with housing. You know, how do we get them back? But they get their kids back, but then it's like, what's next? You know, what's next for them? You know, I recently had a client of mine, she was crying to tears and said, I'd rather give up and go to prison because I can't deal with this. And that to me reminded me of myself, because I remember myself being released and, you know, finding my way through life, and I was struggling, and I said to myself, I'd rather be in prison and not deal with anything, but do I want something like that, somebody else to feel that? No, there's a better life out there, and I understand that by the work that I do now, and, you know, just being at Homeboys and being compassionate, just like Father Greg, I mean, it has opened up so many doors to many women and men there, and showing them that there is a different life.
I want to talk a little bit more about the portrayals of these women in media. Sabra, did you find that any of the women that you worked with, women you've worked with, had internalized any of the way that they were portrayed, that they started to believe some of these things about themselves?
Well, our girls, definitely, the women as well, but the girls are my anchor, right? So when we ask them, you know, here's an opportunity, we're going to teach you how to do TED Talks, what would you like to talk about? You know, we showed them a bunch of TED Talks. We showed Ron Finley's one, you can be a gangster gardener, or you can learn how to fly a plane, or whatever you're passionate about. Every single one of those girls said, we want to tell our stories, because people think we're just bad kids. They don't know what we've been through. And, by the way, that if you had been through what they'd been through, you would be there too. So they really wanted to express their stories themselves, and it was very traumatic, you know. When somebody has been raped by their dad at 10 and left for dead behind a dumpster, how the hell do we expect them to go to school and sit down and copy things nicely down from the blackboard? No, it's not going to happen. So they get pushed out, like Monique says in her book, and then what are they supposed to do? Their parents are either incarcerated because, let's not forget this is a generational issue, or they're struggling. They're left on their own in the daytime, the girls, if they're not already in foster care. And what are they supposed to do? And you know what? I guess what I've realized through hearing their voices and their stories, you know, I thought I knew. I've been doing this work 12 years. I didn't know. Is that in order to make the deep changes that need to be made, rather than doing the surface thing they were talking about earlier, we're going to have to get messy, people, and we don't want to do it. And by messy, I mean you cannot have a neat line between victim and perpetrator. 94% of women who are incarcerated have been sexually or physically abused, or both. I mean, that number, does that not, like, ring a bell? Is it not obvious why they're there? So what the girls have taught me by telling me their stories is that I have to self-reflect, and I have to be prepared to do the really horrible, ugly, messy work of looking at the real issue and really, really taking responsibility for it. $240,000 each girl you're paying. Are you okay with that? I'm not okay with that. Go to see a girls' prison. It will change your life, and it will put a fire under you that nobody will have to tell you to go vote anymore. You will be the first person in the line at the polling station. That's what they've taught me.
I'm glad you brought it back to girls, and I'm glad you brought it back to them being pushed out, back to, because first full circle to our first panel. Because Anna, one of the most poignant, I think a really amazing character in your show, she's a real person, is the young woman who filmed a girl in her class being slammed to the ground by an officer. Can you just tell us a little bit about her and a little bit about how you prepared to present her story on stage?
Well, Allison is talking about, applaud if you saw the video of, the police, the school resource officer throwing young Shakara across the room. The interesting thing to me about Naya Kenny, who is now, I believe, in New York and was with an internship at Columbia University with Kimberly Crenshaw and others. I think she's turning into an activist. I'm not sure about that. She can do whatever she wants. When I talked to her, she said she wanted to have a smoke shop. I hope she gets a smoke shop. She didn't have to be an activist if she didn't want to. But when Naya saw her classmate, Shakara, thrown across the room with all the other students looking at their computers like nothing was happening and the teacher doing nothing, she got up and she started screaming at the top of her lungs, "Aren't you all going to do anything about this?" And she and one of her classmates videoed part of it. And the police officer turned to her and say, "You got so much to say, you're coming too." And he took Shakara away, who was a foster child, was put back into custody. Naya was repeating a class in order to graduate that she'd failed as a freshman, and she got sent to jail. She got sent to jail for opening her mouth. And, I'm sure Monique said something about this. If you saw also a video of a Texas police officer throwing a girl in a pool party across, right? If you look carefully at that video, before he grabs her and throws her in her bikini down to the ground and puts his 210-pound body, it looks like to me, knee on her back, he walks over to her and her girlfriends and says, "You better stop running your mouth." So that, you all would know a lot more about this. This is something about a young lady's not supposed to run her mouth. And this is why Naya went to jail briefly, and, thank God everything's okay. But she takes us back to 3rd grade, where she got up and yelled because her teacher picked up a boy in her class by his cheek. And she said, "You can't do that." So this is, to me, something, too, about what all of us are going to stand for, what we're not going to stand for. And, it's an opportunity for women and girls and boys and men to open our mouths and say we're not standing for what's happening to our brothers and sisters.
And that is a perfect note to end on. Ladies, thank you so much.
Is this on? There we go. Before we go, we're going to hear one final poem to close us out. But before we do, we want to express our sincere gratitude to all of our speakers, moderators, and poets who are part of today. Thanks. Yes. And thank you again to Google for making this morning and this entire series possible, and to all of you who are participating online using the hashtag #DefiningJustice. And lastly, and again, we can't thank you enough. These convenings would never be possible without you taking time out of your busy schedules to be here, to ask really probing, smart questions, and to connect with one another. So we're grateful for you and all of your energies today. And last, our final reading. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming again. My name's Valeria. I'm part of POPs, the club. I'm here with Dan Singer and other ladies. I'm going to read you a piece that I wrote in 12th grade. It's called Transition. All right. As I transition into a young adult, I look back at what I've learned. I'm not the only one with the fucked up world. I'm not the one holding back words that are worth being heard. I'm more than just a brown girl. I won't live the way they want me to, oppressed and without a word. I've learned that this world is twisted, but I can make some difference, breaking stereotypes and doing things differently. I know we're raised with little and given limits, but I won't let that faze me. I will succeed because of the two people who have raised me, with hopes of giving them the world, even if they want nothing in return. I won't be brought down by the hate around me, but I will rise with the love surrounding me. Thank you.